a suit that didn't fit, and a truth that didn't match. Welcome to Rust Evidence. I'm your host, Silas Wren. Where are you listening from? I love reading every single comment. Now, let's dive in. It had been raining since the early morning, the sort of thin, persistent drizzle that seemed less like weather than a habit the city had picked up without noticing. Maigret stood by the narrow kitchen window of the flat on Boulevard Richard Lenoir, his elbows resting on the cool sill, the heavy scent of coffee drifting from the table behind him. Madame Maigret moved quietly between stove and counter, her slippers making the faintest sound on the linoleum. She had tied on a clean apron, the fabric still crisp from the ironing, and was humming something he half recognized but could not place. His pipe lay unlit near the coffee pot. He had filled it, tamped it down, then forgotten it, content to watch the street through a film of condensation on the glass. A grocer's boy wheeled past on a bicycle, his shoulders hunched against the damp, and at the corner, a woman with a small dog paused to fumble with an umbrella that refused to open. It was a morning without urgency, at least for the moment. "You'll be late," Madame Maigret said mildly, pouring the coffee into his cup. He nodded, but did not move. There was still time before the day would demand his presence, before the calls and the files and the faces began again. It was not that he dreaded them, they were part of his life, as inevitable as the rain. Yet there was a certain reluctance to leave the warm, familiar rhythm of home. When the telephone rang, not the sharp, insistent bell of the office line, but the softer domestic one in the hall, he turned slowly, watching his wife set down the pot and wipe her hands before answering. Her voice was polite at first, then she glanced toward him with a flicker of something in her expression. Not alarm exactly, but the faint tightening one feels when the ordinary day shifts by a fraction. "It's for you, Jules," she said, covering the mouthpiece. "A man from the Quai des Orfèvres, but he sounds as if he's calling from the street." Maigret took the receiver. The voice on the other end belonged to Lucas, though muffled by the noise of passing traffic. "Sorry to trouble you at home, Chief. We've got something odd in the Rue de Turenne. Not urgent exactly. No one hurt, just peculiar." Maigret listened, the details coming in fragments. A small boarding house, an early morning complaint from the concierge, a stranger found asleep in the upstairs corridor wearing a suit that was several sizes too large for him, and nothing else in his possession, no papers, no wallet, not even a handkerchief. "He says he doesn't know how he got there," Lucas concluded, "or whose suit it is. Thought you might want to have a look." Maigret let the silence stretch before replying, as if weighing whether this fell within the day's real work or merely its clutter. The truth was, the image of the man in the ill-fitting suit had already fixed itself in his mind, and with it, the faint itch that meant he would not be content to leave it alone. "I'll be there in half an hour," he said, replacing the receiver. He drank his coffee without speaking, the warmth of it a small anchor as the drizzle traced slow paths down the window. Madame Maigret did not ask for details. She never did. When he left, the street was grey and shining, the gutters running in narrow streams. He turned up his coat collar and set out toward the metro, the thought of the boarding house taking shape in his mind. A narrow staircase, the smell of stale cooking, a man whose shoes might be too loose, whose cuffs might hang over his wrists. Somewhere in that image was the thing that would not quite sit right, and it was that, more than any official summons, that drew him on. The metro was warmer than the street, thick with the vaguely metallic smell of damp wool and old rubber. He stood swaying with the train's movement, one hand lightly touching the pole, and watched the city flick by in brief lit tunnels of tile and advertisement. When he emerged at Saint-Sébastien-Froissart, the rain had settled into a steady whisper, as if Paris had decided to speak only in undertones that morning. Rue de Turenne lay slick and faintly luminous, the gutters dragging leaf shreds and cigarette ends toward an unseen drain. Lucas was waiting in the doorway of a small pension squeezed between a printer's shop and a shuttered antiques dealer. He had the rueful expression of a man apologizing for a mess that isn't his. The facade was yellowed plaster with a network of hairline cracks, the kind that made the building look as if it had tried to smile too widely once and never quite recovered. "Upstairs," Lucas murmured, stepping aside. "Madame Vachon is the concierge. She's in a state, but she'll live. The boarders are in the dining room. I kept them there." The narrow hallway smelled of boiled cabbage and old floor polish. A rubber mat had been placed just inside the door and bore the prints of a dozen wet shoes. Maigret paused long enough to note the pattern, a few firm, heel-to-toe impressions, several smaller hesitations, as if someone had stood uncertain just beyond the threshold. He put his hat on the wooden peg and rubbed his hands together to bring feeling back into the fingers. On the first landing, a framed lithograph of a Breton harbour hung crooked, and beyond it, the staircase tightened, the wood creaking faintly underfoot. Lucas kept his voice low, more out of respect for the building than necessity. "He was found here," Lucas said, stopping on the second-floor landing in front of a thin runner carpet. "Asleep, or pretending, just there by the window. Madame Vachon nearly tripped on him when she was going up with a bucket." The window looked onto the light well, its glass clouded by years of breath and coal smoke. A damp patch in the corner of the runner suggested where a bucket had gone over. The corridor bulb hummed. Maigret could picture the scene without effort. The grey light, the concierge's startled little cry swallowed at once by the knowledge that one mustn't make a fuss. There was already a chair beside the wall. Someone had dragged it there to sit the man down. "In there," Lucas said, indicating a door with flaking paint. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and cold iron. It had once been a maid's closet, perhaps. Now there was just space for a chair, a stool, and a small table on which stood a chipped cup with a finger's worth of black coffee cooling in it. The man in the oversized suit sat with his knees together and his hands quiet on his thighs, as if careful not to trouble the fabric. He was 35, perhaps 40, with hair that had been cut recently, the lines still clean above the ears. His face was pale without being sickly. Rather, the pallor of someone who avoids attention. The suit was brown with a faint, broken herringbone that the rain had darkened here and there. The shoulders were absurd. They made him look as if he were shrugging inside a father's jacket. The cuffs swallowed his wrists. The trousers broke twice above the shoes and pooled like tired curtains. The shoes caught Maigret's eye. They were sturdy black Oxfords, the sort one buys once and resoles for years, with dull laces tied carefully. They were almost dry. Not the gloss of a rag just passed over them, but the dull, unremarkable dryness of shoes that had come indoors hours ago. "Chief Inspector," the man said, almost in relief, though Maigret had not yet given his name. His voice was clear, educated enough, with that tone some men adopt when they sense a parent in the room and are glad to surrender responsibility. "You know me?" Maigret asked, not unkindly. The man flushed faintly. "Number, I suppose," I thought. "You look as one imagines." Maigret glanced at Lucas, who had the grace to adjust his tie instead of smiling. He set his hat on the stool and took the other chair. He did not open a notebook. "How did you come here?" The man looked at his hands. They were clean, but not soft, the nails unbitten, the skin along the thumb roughened as if by paper or string. "I woke here, in the corridor. I was cold. Madame, someone, was shouting, and then there were men." He lifted his eyes for a moment. "I don't remember before that." "You don't remember your name?" A pause. "No, nor the suit." Another glance, this one almost a betrayal. "It isn't mine." "No," Maigret said. It isn't." He waited. The building groaned somewhere, the way old houses do in rain, a long, damp sigh that filled the silence for them. "What is yours?" The man frowned, not theatrically, but as one who finds a word he uses daily has become suddenly foreign. A belt mark, he said at last, touching his waist where the trousers gaped. A lighter. Number. He closed his eyes briefly. I know how to fold a letter so it won't tear when you open it quickly. That's foolish. Not foolish, Maigret said. It is the sort of thing one remembers when the larger things are shy. Lucas shifted, eager to help. We searched him, Chief. Nothing, not a coin. The suit pockets had a torn lining, left side, and a piece of blue thread. The jacket has a tailor's mark, but it is smudged. There is a tag in the trousers from a cleaner in the 11th, Rue Saint-Maur. Maigret took the cup, sniffed it, and set it down. The coffee had been poured too quickly. There was a thread of grounds along the lip of the cup, the kind you get when a hand shakes slightly. He stood, and the man's shoulders lifted as if in sympathy. Would you stand a moment? The man obeyed. The trousers fell lower still, revealing socks of thin wool with a mended place near the ankle. The mending was neat, practiced, done with a thread a shade too light, as if the person had used what was at hand. On the back of the right sock, a small grey smear showed where a heel had rubbed against dusty wood. The jacket sagged when the man stood, the breast pocket collapsing. Maigret reached out with 2 fingers and lifted the lapel. There, on the inside seam, someone had taken quick stitches to draw the fabric in. The thread was recent. This was altered in a hurry, Maigret said. Not by a tailor, by someone who wanted it to seem to fit from a distance. He did not look at the man when he said it. He looked at the stitches themselves, at the fact of them, as if they were a small animal whose nature revealed itself if you did not crowd it. I told you, the man said softly. It's not mine. Whose is it? I don't know. Still soft, still true in its way. Do you know this building? A very small hesitation. No. Lucas cleared his throat. Madame Vachon says he's never been here. She knows the regulars. We have a few in the dining room, Mademoiselle Bernard, a music teacher, a commercial traveller, Fournier, a widow, Madame Lefebvre. They all say they don't know him. And yet, Maigret said mildly, he is here. He moved past them into the corridor. It turned shallowly to the right, with 5 doors opening off it. The runner was faded in a line along its middle, as if 2 generations of footsteps had remembered to keep to a decorous path. He knelt with an ease that surprised his knees and touched the edge of the runner where the damp had darkened it. Then he lifted the corner. The boards beneath bore a light tracking of pale dust, the sort that lives in houses where plaster crumbles quietly and windows breathe grit. Among the faint arcs of movement was a clearer line, the sole of a shoe pressed when the runner had been lifted and then replaced without fuss. He lowered the carpet and stood again, feeling the building as he might listen to a man reluctant to speak. He went to the end window and opened it. The sash stuck, then yielded with the tiny sob of wood on paint. A breath of the light well came in. Wet brick, old soap, the sour ghost of yesterday's cooking. He looked down. On the sill, near the latch, a smear not of dust, but of something finer, whiter. Plaster, yes, but fresh enough that a finger would have left a clearer trail. He did not touch it. In the little room the man had lowered himself carefully back onto the chair as if he feared to stretch the suit into some new untruth. His gaze had shifted from Maigret to the floor. Come, Maigret said. See the others. It is not good for people to sit alone with themselves too long on a rainy morning. The dining room was clean in a way that tried a little too hard. Oilcloth on the tables, a framed print of roses whose glass reflected the single bulb as a second sun, the smell of coffee that had been reboiled once and would forgive one more indignity. A woman with grey-pinned hair and a thick cardigan sat with her hands around a cup. Her fingers were bluish at the knuckles. The music teacher, perhaps. Beside her, a man with a neat mustache and a sample case at his feet folded a newspaper in quarters and then in eighths, a habit as toady as a church bell rung on the hour. The widow, one could tell by the way she watched the door without expecting anyone to enter, kept her spoon upright in a bowl as if it were something to lean on. "Madame Vachon," Lucas said. The concierge turned. She was 50, maybe older, with the complexion of a woman who has spent her life in steam. She had put on a dress too thin for the weather and a necklace of worn beads in a defiance so small it became touching. "It is not a house for this," she said at once, eyes on Maigret. "No disturbances. People come here who prefer quiet. You will keep it so?" Her tone suggested that quiet was the commodity she had to sell, and that she took pride in delivering it even when the building worked against her. "We will try," Maigret said. He let his coat collar fall and took a chair at the edge of the room rather than at the center of things. He did not announce himself again. He simply sat until the room settled around his presence as rooms do when a big man allows himself to be furniture. The music teacher looked at the suit, then away. "He looks thin," she said, not to anyone in particular. "Inside the clothes, I mean." "Anyone might look thin in those clothes," the commercial traveler said, cheerful in the way of men who sell things that are never quite necessary. He patted his sample case. "It's a tent." The widow clucked her tongue. "Poor man, lost everything. That's how it begins." "How what begins?" Maigret asked. She blinked, surprised to be addressed. "There is always a beginning," she said, lowered her eyes, and let the spoon go at last. "Have you seen him before?" They shook their heads, each with a small theatricality of denial particular to themselves. The traveller's was brisk, the teacher's apologetic, the widow's offended that he would suggest newness in a place where she had catalogued every face. "And the suit?" Maigret asked. "Does it seem familiar?" Madame Vachon fussed with the beads at her throat. "Gentlemen's suits are all alike." Then, unwilling to be unhelpful, "He is too small for it." She cast a glance toward the man as if his smallness was something he had done to her personally. Maigret nodded and stood again. "Show me the corridor where he was found," he said to her, though he had already seen it. He wanted her story and the place that had given it to her. On the landing she grew less sure of herself, as if away from the anchor of her coffee pot she floated. "I heard a scuffle," she said, then corrected herself quickly. "No, not a scuffle. A sound. As if something slid. I was taking up water for Mademoiselle Bernard because her radiator sputters when it rains. And then, just here," she indicated the runner. He was lying, with his hand under his cheek like a child. The offense in her voice then was not at the presence of a stranger, but at the position. Childlike, too intimate for a corridor. "You did not see anyone leave?" "Number 1 was in the kitchen before. I heard nothing from the front door." She paused. "Monsieur Fournier's shoes were on the mat earlier than usual this morning. He goes out at 7. Today it was 6:30, I think. But men who sell things must go when the world is sleepy, I suppose." Maigret looked at the runner again, then at the man in the suit, who had come as far as the doorway and now stood like a penitent, unsure if the priest is in. "You woke cold," he said, "but your shoes are not wet." The man looked down as if the shoes had committed some indiscretion without his consent. "I don't know." "They were not wet because you came in last night," Maigret said, not pressing, "or because you did not come in from the street at all." He turned the window latch once more and let another inch of rain-scented air into the corridor. "The light well, perhaps. There is a gutter pipe." Lucas made a small noise, half protest, half admiration. He could have climbed. In this weather, in that suit? "Not in that suit," Maigret said. "No." He looked at the quick stitches again. "Someone dressed him." He said it as one might observe that soup has been salted twice. It was a fact one could taste more than prove. Downstairs a clock chimed the quarter hour, a cheap, honest sound. The morning had taken shape and would not be hurried now. He turned back to the dining room and stood in the doorway until they looked up. "We will take our man to the quay for a while," he said, and they nodded, relieved to have the problem assigned to a place with heavier walls. "Monsieur Fournier," he added without looking to see which man flinched, "you rose early today. Why?" The traveler smiled his tidy smile. "I had a train to catch, Inspector, or thought I did. Then I learned my client is indisposed." "Ah." Maigret's pipe was still in his coat pocket, but he did not take it out. Indisposed is a useful word. He let his gaze drift past them to the hall clock and then to the board, where the rooms and their keys were listed in a neat hand. On one hook there was no key, only a loop of string where one ought to hang. Room 5. Someone had tied the string carefully, as if to pretend that absence was a form of order. He filed it with the other small things that might together make a larger thing if one were patient. On the street again, the rain had found its steady voice. The man in the suit shivered as if finally remembering he had a body. Maigret put a hand on his elbow, not as a policeman takes a prisoner, but as a large man steers a smaller one through a crowd without saying pardon. Lucas walked a step ahead to hail a taxi. From an upper window a curtain shifted, then closed. The city, which had seen everything, pretended not to see this too. As they waited, a thought brushed him. Not a conclusion, only that faint itch at the edge of knowing. The suit had been made for a broader man with a fuller chest, a man who moved differently. This one barely disturbed the air when he walked. The stitches had been quick, the thread mismatched, the work done by someone who did not mind being seen doing it because they imagined no one would look. And the shoes, dry. There was a cleaner's name on the trouser tag. There would be a girl who wrote those tags in pencil in the 11th, who noticed when a suit left a stain she could not quite lift. Someone would have told her to hurry. In the taxi, the man watched the blur of the windshield wiper with the concentration of a child following a pendulum. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly, as if apologizing for the rain itself. "There is no hurry," Maigret replied, and felt that it was true. Some cases demanded speed. This one demanded the decency of allowing a thing to admit what it was in its own time. He would sit with the man later, perhaps in the small, warm room off the corridor at the quay, with a stove ticking and a glass of beer he would not drink. He would say very little. And somewhere between the third and fourth silence, the man would reach for a word that had been there all along, hiding like a frightened animal that comes out only when the kitchen is quiet. For now, he watched the street, the way the rain made the city honest by washing it down to its lines and joints. The suit, the stitches, the window, the early shoes on the mat, the missing key that had been replaced by a loop of string. Small things, all of them. Enough, perhaps, to carry him into the afternoon. Enough to understand why, in a quiet boarding house where nothing ever happened, a man would be found asleep in a suit that didn't fit. At the quay, the rain became a different thing, thinner and more vertical, as if out of respect for the river. The taxi left a pale wake on the cobbles. Inside, the corridor light had the same tired hum as the boarding house, but the smell was different. Varnish, paper, the persistent ghost of stale tobacco that never really left even when windows were flung open. Lucas led the man past the duty desk with a nod that told the clerk to write nothing yet. It was not a case to be announced to ledgers. They settled him in the small room off the main corridor, where a stove ticked like an old man clearing his throat. The chair there had a sprung place that made one choose a side. The man found it at once, as if he had the instinct of people who do not trust furniture to be kind. Maigret sent for coffee and a roll, not as kindness, though it was that too, but because heat and sugar sometimes coaxed a word from where it had hidden. "You can rest," he said. He did not say, "Tell me your name." There are questions a man must come to on his own. The duty doctor came, sniffed discreetly, and felt the man's pulse with fingers that had seen every variety of morning after. "No alcohol," he murmured, a little surprised. "At least not since last night. A bruise on the forearm, here, recent, not violent. A thorn of glass in the cuff, small. No head injury that I can see. Tired. The tiredness of someone who has kept a long watch and doesn't remember why. Thank you, Maigret said. When the doctor had gone, he took the man's cuff between thumb and forefinger. There, as the doctor had said, a tiny gleam where a sliver had lodged and been rubbed until it fell away. He let the cuff go. We will see you later, he told the man, and left him with the stove's patient ticking. In his office, he did the things that make a morning look like work to anyone watching. He hung his coat, glanced at the stack of papers placed just so by a clerk, moved his pipe from one side of the blotter to the other. Then he pushed the papers aside and looked out at the wet light on the Seine. Lucas came to the door and waited. He knew better than to bring 3 questions when one would do. Janvier, Maigret said without turning. The cleaner's on Rue Saint-Maur. Go now. Ask for the person who writes the tags. She will remember if someone stood at the counter with a suit that was not his. Lucas, back to the pension. The keyboard, room 5. If there is a string where a key should be, ask her why. Ask who sleeps there, and look in the bin. People who sew badly also throw away their courage with the thread ends. Lucas grinned despite himself and vanished. When he was gone, a shadow filled the doorway in the way that gloom fills it before rain. Inspector Lognon, with the expression of a man who has already written a report in his head and doesn't like the ending. You have strays now? Lognon asked, nodding toward the corridor. It's a good day for them. The rain washes them into the corners. A man in a suit that doesn't fit, Maigret said. He woke in a corridor. No name, no money. He watched Lognon's reaction in the way one watches the first drop on a window to see how the rest will fall. A thief who lost his purse? Lognon said promptly, or a clerk who wants a day off from being himself. His wife will come in crying before noon. Perhaps. Maigret let it sit between them. He found that disagreement, when expressed too soon, made men stand on it like a crate. Lognon advanced a step, lowered his voice. There's talk of a robbery near the Bastille last night. A warehouse. Fabric bolts. Nothing official yet. It's only that a night watchman said he heard sash windows move. I say it because your man has stitching on his sleeve like a cat worried it. Maigret looked up at that. You brought me something useful, Lognon. I am capable of it, Lognon said gloomily, and turned away as if offended by the possibility. When the door had side closed, Maigret sat a while. He filled his pipe and did not light it. The thought came and went like a tram, glimpsed between buildings, a warehouse of cloth, a suit adjusted in a hurry, a sliver of glass in a cuff. But he did not chase it. He let it circle. A clerk appeared with the coffee for the man. Leave it, Maigret said, and carried it himself. The man's hands lifted obediently, but did not take the cup until Maigret put it against the warmth of his palms. The stove? The man asked, in an odd voice, as if there were a test he hoped to pass. It ticks when it cools, Maigret said. The man nodded, listening. I know a sound like that. Somewhere I used to be. There was a kettle that sang too long. People came at 4 with papers still damp from the rain. Papers, Maigret said without emphasis. The man's thumb touched the cup's ear the way a man touches string to hold a parcel steady. Stamped, the man added, almost eagerly, and then his face closed up as if a draught had run through him. He held the cup, did not drink. Janvier returned before the coffee cooled. He did not come in, breathless. He leaned into the door as if it were a bar where he would rest an elbow. Rue Saint-Maur, he said, a narrow place with 3 irons and a woman who looks like a pot lid left too long on the boil. The tags are written by a girl with red nails. She remembers a suit yesterday, late, brought in with a stain on the lapel. Grease, she said, the kind you get from a door that wasn't cleaned when it was painted. Rush job. She pressed it and had it ready before closing. The suit was for a Monsieur Delmas. Address, she wrote, Pension Vachon, room 5. And who took it? A boy, not hers. a messenger who does errands for the street. She says he was in a hurry and got a coin he hadn't expected. She liked that part. She thought it was gallant. He took the suit at 6:30. Maigret nodded. Good. He looked at the man across the stove. Delmas, he said. The man looked at him blank as a new envelope. Do you know a Delmas? The man shook his head slowly, as if he had reasons not beyond ignorance. Lucas, Maigret asked without turning, and Lucas, who had appeared behind Janvier with rain still in his eyebrows, said, Room 5 is rented to a Monsieur Delmas on a weekly basis. He's not there. The bed is made, but not by Madame Vachon. She says he makes his own and makes a point of telling her so. In the waste bin I found a small nest of blue thread ends and a needle bent like a fish hook. On the windowsill, a chalk line where a tailor's marker rested. The window to the light well sticks, but it has been opened and closed recently. A flake of paint fell onto the floor and was swept in a hurry. The broom left a crescent. A warehouse, Maigret said to himself without meaning to say it aloud. Lucas twitched an eyebrow. Nothing, Maigret said. Fournier. The traveller was back in his room when I left. His case was open. Socks rolled like little soldiers. He has a ticket stub to Melun for this afternoon. The concierge confirms he went out at 6:30 and returned at 8, complaining of a misprint in a timetable that exists only in his mouth. And Mademoiselle Bernard. Madame Lefebvre. The music teacher's radiator does sputter. It left a brunette curl of steam on the wall. She says she hears footsteps like a man counting, slow, then quick, then slow, last night at 11. The widow prays with her spoon. She saw a shadow on the light well wall, she thinks at midnight, but says shadows are untrustworthy companions. Maigret stood, not because of any sudden need to move, but because his back had told him it was time. He went to the small room's window, looked out at the indistinct rain. Behind him, the stove ticked once, a louder sound, like a throat cleared before a name. Delmas, he said again. He turned back to the man. Would you try something? Close your eyes and think of the street, the one where you were last certain of yourself. The man obeyed. His face altered when his eyes closed, smoothed itself as if sight were a burden. A bell, he said. Not a church bell. Smaller, like a bicycle, but lower. And a smell. Glue, paper glue, and ink that has grown tired. He opened his eyes suddenly, frightened by his own certainty. I'm sorry. It makes no sense. It makes enough, Maigret said. Janvier, go to the nearer post offices and small depots between Rue Saint-Maur and Rue de Turenne. Ask if they miss a man this morning whose thumb is rough from string. Don't ask for a name. Ask for a habit. Janvier was gone before the stove could tick again. Lucas hovered. We will go back, Maigret said to him. Bring him. He meant the man, and the man heard it, and rose as if standing with policemen might lend him a spine. In the corridor, Longyon watched them pass with the expression of a man who has just remembered a rule someone else is breaking. The rain had the patience of a civil servant. It did not increase. It did not stop. The taxi's leather smelled of damp wool and something medicinal. They rode without speaking. The man pressed his forehead to the glass and watched the city as if it might mouth his name to him from the windows. At the pension, Madame Vachon had changed into a dress with darker beads. It made her look like the same woman with a different answer prepared. You will not be bringing journalists, she said before hello. We will bring a name, Maigret said, which appeased her. He did not go straight to room 5. He stood first in the hall, listening as if the building could be coaxed into repeating a story told badly the first time. A drip somewhere in the pipes kept imperfect time. The runner had dried a little, but where he had lifted it earlier, the dust had taken a new print, a smaller half-moon. Fresh. He crouched, considered it, and looked toward the stairs. Mademoiselle Bernard's shoes made a soft scuff on the step above as if she took small, conscientious bites of the world. He straightened. Room 5's door yielded to Madame Vachon's key with a sulk. The room smelled of soap and a man's breath after he has slept with his mouth open. It was neat in the way of men who like to be congratulated for neatness. Socks paired, a collar brushing on the chair back, a book placed sideways on the nightstand to show that the reader was tidy even in his disorder. On the table lay a small square of white chalk, and beside it, a button of brown horn with thread still coughing from its eye. The thread was blue. On the floor, near the window, a sliver of glass no bigger than a fingernail. He nudged it with a matchstick into his handkerchief and pocketed it. Lucas opened the wardrobe. 2 shirts, one with a laundry's turned-down crease that had not been worn since pressing, a suit hanger with the shoulder polished by absence. Delmas, Lucas said, reading a name penciled on a paper tucked behind the shelf. He liked to remind himself of himself. On the bed cover, a faint impression where a hand had rested, fingers splayed as if measuring. Maigret put his own hand beside it and saw the difference at once. The owner of the hand had broader pads, a square palm. The suit, in the cleaners, would have sat on that hand's shoulder without persuasion. "Madame," he called into the corridor, and when the concierge came, he asked without guile, if Monsieur Delmas had not left his key, "What would you do?" She lifted her chin. "I would hang a string. We do not leave emptiness. Emptiness invites questions." "And his habits?" "He paid on Fridays. He did not like other people's noise. He ate out when he had to. Otherwise, he brought food in. A little parcel. He said restaurants make one fat with salt. He spoke to no one but said good evening to everyone. He was proud of his shoes." "Proud," Maigret repeated. "Yes. He kept them near the door and looked at them when he came in, like a man greets a dog." Maigret went to the door and looked down. The mat outside was of the cheap kind that sheds black whiskers. There were none now. The line where shoes would have stood was clean, in the way a patch of grass is clean where a chair has stood all summer. He imagined the shoes missing from that line last night, imagined the suit in the cleaners, the blue thread in the waste bin, the loop of string on the keyboard pretending to be a key. Pretense upon pretense, all of it careful, none of it clever. He turned to the man in the oversized suit. "Do you feel anything in this room?" The man's eyes moved over the bed, the table, the wardrobe with the dignity of someone trying not to be ridiculous. When his gaze fell on the chalk, he paused. "We used something like that to mark packages when the ink was wet, so the address wouldn't smear. I would blow on it gently." He put his hands in front of his mouth as if to show it, then stopped, ashamed of the intimacy. "Take your time," Maigret said. There was a sound from the stairs, a man's flat steps that did not hurry but did not dawdle either. Janvier appeared in the doorway with his cap in his hand and rain on his eyelashes. He spoke low, for Maigret's ear. "At the sub-post office on Rue Saint-Gilles, they are missing a man this morning, a temporary clerk who tied parcels with a speed the others envied. He is called Martin, they think. Or perhaps that is his middle name. There was confusion. He did not come in. Yesterday he left at 6 with a parcel he insisted on carrying himself to save the client a fee. He was last seen near Rue Saint-Maur. Maigret looked at the man, who was holding his breath without knowing it. "Martin," he said, "does that belong to you?" The man opened his mouth, closed it, swallowed, and shook his head, not in denial, but as one shrugs off a coat that is not his. No, perhaps." He touched the chalk with a forefinger as if testing if it would burn. "We will not force your name," Maigret said. "It will come when it wants. For now, we will look for Monsieur Delmas's shoes." "Shoes?" Lucas asked, baffled for the first time that morning. "Proud men do not go far without them," Maigret said. He went to the window and pulled it open despite the stick. The light well breathed its wet breath into the room. On the narrow ledge below, maybe 3 feet down, there was a smear not of plaster, but of something softer, darker, with a faint, dull sheen. A heel mark dragged through damp soot. Below that, farther down, a mottled darkness that might have been nothing but wash water spattered against brick. Or, if one were the sort of man to wait, watch, and listen, the place where a shoe had kissed the wall and slid. He closed the window, gently, as if not to disturb the building's small dignity. In the corridor, the runner lay meek and ordinary once more. The city made a sound like breathing. "Come," he said. "We will have a word with Fournier's timetable, and then with a boy who likes coins on Rue Saint-Maur. And perhaps—" He looked once, very briefly, at the man in the suit as a father looks at a child who has almost remembered his own address. "With a bell that is not a church bell." He did not hurry. The day would do what it liked with their footsteps. The rain, patient as ever, kept its counsel. Fournier received them with the brightness of a man who has rehearsed being agreeable and would like to see how he does. His door was open, a deliberate width, the sample case on the bed as if caught in a candid moment of industry. He had changed his tie. The knot was a little off, betraying a hurry he would have denied. "You have a ticket to Milan," Maigret said without greeting. Fournier's smile held. "Had. I tore it up when my client sent word. Influenza. Everyone has it. He wouldn't know a good fabric from a sack when he's feverish. So why waste a trip?" "The stub," Maigret said mildly. Fournier produced it with a little flourish from the saucer on the washstand, where it lay like a keepsake. "You see, I keep things tidy." Lucas had drifted to the window with the manner of a man who needed light for nothing in particular. 2:30, he observed, reading the time on the stub. "You rose early for a train at 2:30. "I like to feel the day," Fournier said, "and I had to collect my samples from a cousin in the Marais. People borrow, you know. I try to be helpful. One is punished for it." "The misprint?" Maigret asked, watching how the man carried the lie, whether it made him hunch or stand straighter. "In the timetable." Fournier laughed, not uncharmingly. "Ah, that. The concierge listens. I said misprint. I meant mischance. We speak imprecisely before coffee. And you returned at 8. I took a walk. The rain was pleasant then, like a curtain one can hide behind. I'm a man of simple pleasures, Inspector. I look at windows, I imagine dinners I will not eat." He spread his hands. "If I had known you would require an itinerary, I would have written to myself on postcards at each corner." Maigret did not smile. He looked at the sample case. It was open like a mouth, lined with little books of swatches, cloth corrugated by handling, silky squares that made vague promises of improvement to men who feared their wives had opinions about lapels. There, tucked at the side, was a small roll of tailor's chalk, the same white square he had seen in room 5, but rounded at the edges from use. Fournier saw his glance and followed it too late. "One needs chalk," Fournier said lightly, "to demonstrate a seam to a client, to imagine where a button might be kinder. I am not a tailor. I use props." "And blue thread? For effect?" Fournier looked at Lucas as if for help, then back at Maigret. "Thread? Number I sell cloth. Others sew." Maigret stepped closer to the case and reached into the small pocket. He did not ask permission. His fingers came up with a hotel laundry slip for a shirt, and behind it, caught in the seam, 3 hairs of blue thread as fine and stubborn as cobweb. He let them lie on his palm, said nothing, and then blew once. They lifted and stuck to the chalk. "You have a neat way of pretending to be careless," Maigret said. "Yesterday you pretended to chase a train. This morning you pretended to have no timetable. The trouble with pretending, Monsieur Fournier, is that it keeps one too busy to notice the thing one is supposed to be." Fournier's smile thinned at the edges. "Is there a law against chalk dust on a salesman's fingers?" "There is no law against anything that is almost true," Maigret said. He set the chalk back where he had found it, as methodically as Fournier arranged his swatches. "Where were you at 11 last night?" "I was here. I read. I'm a man who reads. The widow Lefebvre can testify that I turned pages." The music teacher heard footsteps as if someone were counting. Slow, then quick, then slow. "She counts all day," Fournier said with the impatience of men who live near artists. "Any noise becomes exercise to her." "Your shoes?" Fournier looked down, surprised by them. They were well polished, with that tidy dullness of a man who wipes rather than shines. "What of them? You keep them near the door when you come in." "I am not an animal," Fournier said, then softened it with a laugh. "Yes, near the door. Mud belongs in the hall." "Last night," he hesitated, and in the space of that hesitation the room grew a degree colder. "I placed them under the bed," he said carefully. "I was tired." "We will see," Maigret said, not because there was anything to see, but because men behaved differently when they were told they would not be allowed to tidy the past. He let the door close on Fournier's polite posture and stood in the hallway long enough to feel the house breathe again. On Rue Saint-Maur, the rain had shaved itself to a mist that made hats look frosted. The cleaner's shop was a glass-fronted box with damp breath trapped inside, irons cooling like sleeping animals on their backs. The girl with red nails was pressing a collar into obedience and did not stop when they entered. She looked up from beneath the weight of her fringe with the cool unconcern of someone who knows police prefer facts to charm. "The messenger boy," Maigret said. "The one who took the suit. Where does he sit when he is not being a gentleman?" She considered. Iron paused at the exact angle before scorching. "He plays with the bells at Jourdain's bicycle repair, 2 doors down," she said. "He prefers the one that goes dom instead of ding. He says it makes him feel important." Her mouth threatened to smile and then decided against it. "He likes coins that surprise him." Jourdain's was a cave of odors: rubber, cold metal, stale tobacco, the honest smell of things that resist becoming new. In the back, a man with a jaw like a vice was loosening a pedal from a crank with secular patience. On the counter lay a scatter of bells, some sharp-sounding, some dull. One made a low, domestic note, polite as a servant announcing tea. Behind the counter, a boy of 14 or too-thin 15 had his fingers on that bell as if it were a pet. He removed them when he saw Maigret, as men remove hats for priests. "You like that one," Maigret said. "It's serious," the boy said, shy but proud. "It says what it has to say and no more." He blushed as if he had said something foolish to a girl. "You took a suit to a boarding house yesterday for the cleaner." He took a breath. "Yes." "You were paid for haste." He stared at the counter's edge as if it might move. "A man in a brown coat gave me 2 francs because he was late for a parcel. He asked if I could take something to room 5. I took it. I like to be thought useful." This man, broad shoulders, a neat mustache. "Brown coat," the boy repeated, as if repeating the one true thing might please them. He had a hand like a shoe. He demonstrated, flat and heavy. "Did he go with you to the pension?" "Number." He waited near the bakery with a paper that wasn't the right day. The boy frowned, applying his own sense of order to the memory. He didn't read. He looked at his shoes. "Proud of them?" The boy nodded. They were proud of themselves anyway. "After you delivered the suit, you returned to him?" He was gone. "Who opened room 5? "The concierge. She was cross that I arrived near closing. I said, 'It's not my fault when men are late.' And she said, 'It is never yours, bird.'" He touched the bell again, softly, in case it would forgive him. "Did you see the suit again?" The boy shook his head. "Only how it made a small man look smaller," he said, surprising himself with the thought, like a snail wearing someone else's shell. Outside, Lucas made a notebook of his pockets. Delmas takes his own key, arranges his suit to be cleaned, then pays a boy to hurry it back. He's in love with his shoes and does not read the paper when he holds it. He is gone before the suit returns and someone else wears it. And a parcel, Maigret said. There was a parcel. The boy spoke it without knowing. A man late for a parcel. Our clerk at the sub-post office was efficient. Perhaps he prided himself on saving clients a fee. Suppose someone asked for that habit. Suppose someone asked him to carry a parcel to a door that hadn't been cleaned when it was painted "The Warehouse," Lucas said, catching up. Perhaps, Maigret said, not because he doubted it, but because things that are admitted too early take offense and run. He looked back into Jourdan's at the row of bells. The boy had his finger on the low one again, and its polite note vibrated in the glass like the echo of a thought. They took the short cut to Rue Saint-Gilles through a passage that smelled of onion skins and soap. At the sub-post office, the clerk behind the grill had a face the color of old ivory and a manner that said he had been disappointed by people and had forgiven them, but only once. He recognized Janvier and nodded to Maigret with the respect a man gives a big dog that might be friendly. "Our temporary," he said before they asked, "has not come. He is called Martin until someone corrects me." He tied parcels as if they were a currency, and he could find a label under 3 other labels without sulking. He left with 1 parcel yesterday because he hates waste. "No sense to pay a boy for what I can do with legs," he said. "To where?" The clerk made a face. "See?" He pulled a ledger from under the counter with the intimacy of long use and ran a thumb down a column. "Quai de la Râpée, a warehouse. The client declared cloth bolts. The parcel itself was small. Documents, perhaps. Men who deal in cloth believe papers weigh more than cloth. Did he return? He did not return. But the bell?" He gestured to the little counter bell, its dome dented politely, rang twice near closing. That is, someone came in, pressed it without calling out, and left. I found on the counter a button. Brown. It did not belong to me. "A bell," Maigret said, almost to himself. He reached and pressed it once. It made the sound the man had described. Not a bicycle's bright scold, not a church, but a lower domestic announcement. He looked at the clerk. "You open at what hour?" 4:30, rain or not. "And the kettle sings too long in the back." The clerk glanced toward the doorway behind him. "She forgets it," he said. "We all have our faults." "May I see the parcel receipt?" Maigret asked. The man slid over a paper with the reluctance of a person sharing a family photograph. The signature for collection was a scrawl that could have been anyone. The sender, an initial only, and then the word Dell. The rest smudged by a finger too impatient. The receiving warehouse had signed with a stamp that came down crooked. A small streak of grease darkened the margin where a door might have kissed the paper that had brushed it. "You like your ink to look tired," Maigret said to the clerk, who did not understand it was a compliment and stiffened. "It dries when it dries," he said, offended by metaphors. Outside, the rain felt suddenly of use, as if it had rinsed the morning free of its vagueness. Lucas watched him. "We go to the warehouse?" "In a moment," Maigret said. He looked at his watch and at the sky, which could not be hurried. "First, we will ask our traveler to account for his shoes properly." In Fournier's room, the bed had acquired an air of innocence, like a face arranged for a photographer. The sample case was closed. Fournier had put on his coat, but not to leave, only to look less undressed. "You did not put your shoes under the bed," Maigret said, without heat. "You left them in the hall because you are proud of them, and then you fetched them back because it occurred to you that men look at mats when they think. You cleaned the whiskers of the mat with your hand, which is why there was no black mark when there ought to have been." Fournier opened his mouth and then chose to be tired instead. "I brought them in because there was glass in the hallway," he said, choosing a detail he hoped would support the rest. "I do not wish to step on glass." "There was glass in room 5, Maigret said. "A sliver. Perhaps you are sensitive to glass in general." Fournier's expression flickered. and in that flicker, Maigret saw a man who had done a small, clumsy thing with too much intention. "What do you want?" Fournier said. Not defiant, merely resigned to a bill. "Your truth," Maigret said. "Only the smallest portion at first. Did Monsieur Delmas ask you to fetch his suit, or did you offer? You have chalk, you have thread. You have a habit of going out before others wake. Do not make work for yourself," Maigret said, and the voice that came out of him was not angry, but very heavy. "If you must lie, place it on a chair, not on your back." Fournier looked at the case, as if truth might be folded inside with the swatches. "He asked," he said finally, each word pried up with effort. "He said he could not leave his room because he awaited a delivery. He was agitated. A man who does not like to be seen when he is not in control. I was going anyway." "You brought back the suit," Maigret said. "To room 5. I left it with the concierge. She is the queen of keys." He attempted to smile and abandoned it. "He did not open to me when I knocked. There was a noise as if a chair had been moved against the floor. I had a train to pretend to catch." "And later you sewed," Maigret said. Fournier's mouth hardened. "Not I do not sew." "No," Maigret said, and it gave him a small private pleasure to agree. "You do not sew." Back in the corridor, Lucas stepped close. "If not Fournier, Delmas," Maigret said, "or someone in his room, someone with blue thread and no patience, who could not let a sleeve hang absurdly, someone who thought a suit could disguise a shape as a coat disguises a nail." He felt, rather than saw, the small presence at his back and turned to find the man in the oversized suit standing there, his hands at his sides, listening like a boy who has followed the sound of adult voices. "The bell," the man said, barely above a whisper. "It is that bell." He looked not at the bicycle shop but beyond, toward the memory. "And the glue, and the stove." "You worked at the sub-post office," Maigret said, with the same voice he might use to say, "You have come back from a long walk. For a day, for a week, long enough to make a habit of saving money for other men." The man's eyes filled, not with drama, but with the embarrassment of someone whose pocket has torn in public. "I did not wish to be a hero," he said. "I wished to be useful." "It comes to the same thing," Maigret said. "For now, we will go to the warehouse on the Quai de la Râpée and ask them what they received last night. Cloth, a parcel, and a man who was proud of his shoes." "And if the man is there?" Lucas asked. "If he is there," Maigret said, "he will have changed his suit. But shoes are slower to repent, and even pride leaves a print when it slides." He thought of the smear on the light-well brick, of the chalk square on Delmas's table, of the missing key replaced by a loop of string, which was a way of telling the world, there is order where there is not. He thought of the kettle that sang too long. He listened for a moment to the house, which had more to say when one did not ask. They went out into a rain that had decided to be honest again, each drop a small, complete thing. The river waited with its old patience. Somewhere a bell sounded, the small, low kind, serious, without ceremony. And for the first time that day, Maigret felt the case take his arm instead of his collar. The Quai de la Râpée had the grey look of places that believe work is a virtue in itself. Warehouses stood like blunt-backed animals along the water, their windows filmed with the breath of years. The rain had grown thin again, a net that caught nothing and fell through itself. Lucas paid the taxi while Maigret stood a moment under the jut of a loading bay, smelling rope and wet wood, tobacco crushed under heels somewhere out of sight. Inside, the air was warmer, heavy with the lanolin sweetness of wool and a salt of old sweat. A bell on the office door clucked once when they entered. The night watchman was there, a man with cheeks like boiled leather and the apologetic posture of those who have heard their story already, even if they haven't told it. "We open at 6, he said, before either of them could ask, "and close when the tally says so. Last night I did my rounds at 11:30. The windows on the riverside?" One was not how I left it. He glanced at the ledger on the counter as if it had been a witness too. Sash raised a finger's width. I closed it. I remember because the paint sticks, and there's grease where a man leaned after the last painting. Grease, Maigret repeated mildly, because the word had shown itself to him twice already today. You heard nothing, only the river thinking its thoughts. The watchman hesitated, and then added, with the care of someone risking ridicule, and shoes. Not the hard sort that sound proud. A careful sort, the kind a man wears who doesn't want to be heard in a place where men usually shout to be brave. 2 men? Lucas asked. I don't like to say because I saw only pieces. A shadow near the office, a cough swallowed too late. But yes, 2 sets of feet in my head afterward. One that put itself down as if it belonged, another that tried to borrow the floor and not crease it. The foreman came from the counting room with a pen behind his ear and a smudge of graphite on his cheek like a forgotten thought. He was brisk without being rude, the briskness of a man who lives by invoices. If it's about bolts of cloth, he said, we have counted and found our count the same. The rumor has more folds than the truth. Not cloth, then, Maigret said. Papers. The foreman's mouth twitched, not toward a smile, but toward the admission that papers weighed more in his life than cloth did. There was a delivery last night, he said, opening a drawer and drawing out a clipboard whose metal clip had chewed the corners of its charge. A small package to match a large one. The large one came yesterday afternoon, 20 bolts from Delmas-et-Cie, Rue du Faubourg du Temple. The small one was a certificate and a customs letter. Routine, but it smoothed the world. The messenger was prompt, which is a novelty. He signed with a hand that had tied string too long. He looked up, surprised at his own poetry. Describe him, Maigret said. A neat man made untidy by rain, not a jacket that fit him. He apologized to the paper when he signed it. Men do that, don't they, when they are not certain of their names? He glanced at Lucas, a little embarrassed. He said he would come back for a receipt. I said there was none beyond his signature. He looked relieved. That was at 6. And later? The foreman moved his pen from behind one ear to the other, perhaps to remind himself which ear was honest. Later, there was a man who pretended to read the posted rates. He admired his shoes in the reflection of the office glass, though he made a show of squinting at figures. He went away when I coughed. He smelled a little of the cleaners, petrol, the sort that clings to trousers when they have been pressed in a hurry. A moustache? Maigret asked, not pressing the word, but letting it lie near the foreman's attention. Yes, the foreman said after a beat, neat as a line of stitches on a hymn book. Maigret considered the ledger, its columns like a city of small certainties. He touched a corner with a blunt finger. There, the stamp he had seen on the sub-post office receipt came back to him, the same crooked press, the same smudge where a door's dirty edge had kissed paper. Who raised the sash? He asked. The watchman closed it before midnight, the foreman said. I opened it this morning because the office smelled of wet wool and impatience. The latch is new since last month. It has teeth that don't know the frame yet. They walked the perimeter with the watchman, their soles scuffing the polite sawdust by the loading doors. At the river window, the paint had indeed stuck and then yielded, leaving a curl like a shaving on the sill. In the corner where the sash met the frame, a small dull glitter lived stubbornly in the groove, a thorn of glass, not from her, edges too sharp, too clean, more like a shard carried in a cuff and shaken loose by annoyance. Maigret used a match to lever it onto his handkerchief and folded it without looking triumphant. The watchman, seeing nothing, nodded as if to a right. 2 men, Maigret said, more to the room than to the watchman. One who carried the paper in the afternoon, one who returned in the evening to admire himself, and somewhere the suit that did not fit. There was a jacket, the watchman said unexpectedly. In the yard this morning, behind the crates, hung over the handle of a barrow as if someone had left it to dry and forgot. brown with a herringbone so faint it might be a memory. I put it on a nail near the stove because I thought the foreman had lost a cousin. They found it just inside the little room where men drank their black coffee standing up. The jacket was damp at the hem, dry at the collar, and wore the tiredly recent smell of petrol and steam. Inside the lapel, the quick blue stitches gathered a slack that could not be gathered. The breast pocket was empty except for a grey scale of grit, brick powder perhaps, and a flat, hard fleck that could have been a crumb of dried chalk. "Who brought this in?" Maigret asked. "A boy who likes coins," the watchman said with the small pride of a man who catalogues his world. "He runs errands along the street. He said he found it this morning when he came to see if anyone would let him ring the bell for amusement. I told him bells are for commerce." "The same boy," Lucas said quietly. "He collects seriousness," Maigret said, almost approving. He pinched the blue stitches and felt the decision in them. Not skill, but a sort of insistence. Whoever had sewn had not believed in his hands and had forced them to obey in spite of themselves. He thought of Fournier's prop chalk and the thread ends in Delmas's waste bin. He thought of the missing shoes in the line of the mat. The foreman had been watching them with the patience of men who know police smell, meaning in lint. "Is there trouble?" he asked, less to be informed than to be reassured that he had already done all the right things a foreman can do. "Only a suit that tried to be two men at once," Maigret said. "Tell me about Delmas et Cie." "Jobbers," the foreman said promptly. "Not dishonest, just cut close to the bone. They keep a small office and a wide ledger. A man there likes things just so. Shoes near the door, ties in a row, that sort. He makes his staff prove their worth by disapproving of other men's waste." "Name?" "Delmas." The name on the billhead and the man both. When they stepped outside again, the river showed its color at last, a weary pewter that suited men who kept ledgers. The rain took a breath and paused. Lucas tilted his face up as if this were a personal kindness. "We go to Delmas et Cie," he said. "We will," Maigret said. "But first, I will make a telephone call." He said it without importance, as if it were a small errand for a friend, and walked to the cafe on the corner, the kind where the floor holds old mud like a memory, and the zinc counter knows names. The proprietor nodded them to the back, where the telephone sat on a shelf between two calendars from last year, and the year before that. Madame Maigret answered at the second ring because she lived at a pace that allowed for second rings. He told her he would be late for lunch, that the rain would carry him through to something like stew at the quay, that there might be a visit to the shops near the temple later. "Have you eaten?" she asked, and he said yes, which was almost true. "Your jacket," she said after a moment in which he had not expected another question. "I hung it in a busy place and forgot it," he said, smiling without meaning to. "I will find it. They rarely run far." "Shoes don't run," she said. "Suits pretend to walk by themselves. Shoes tell the truth when they squeak." He could hear her rinsing something at the sink, a small rush of water like honest applause. "Come home dry if you can," she added, and the line was warm even when it went silent. Back on Rue de Faubourg du Temple, Delmas et Cie was a first-floor office above a shop that sold umbrellas which did not look as if they would keep one dry. A glass door with gold letters announced the firm to no one in particular. Inside, the air was tidy. A woman with a severe bun and a pencil as sharp as impertinence looked up, saw their faces, and softened by a degree. "Monsieur Delmas is at lunch," she said, which meant he was where he always was at this hour, with his back to a wall and his shoes visible under the table. "May I say what it concerns?" "His suit," Maigret said, and watched her eyes. Ah. It was not surprise, exactly, but the recognition that a thing one has been ignoring has taken a seat at one's desk. He dislikes to be discussed in his absence. "We will discuss him in his presence," Maigret said gently. "In the meantime, does a man from your office live at the Pension Vachon?" She looked at the pencil as if it might object. "Monsieur Delmas keeps a room there when he works late." He does not like to be obliged to taxis who talk too much. He prefers to be near his papers. And a temporary clerk? Thin, careful, good with string. "We had one last week," she said reluctantly. "From the agency. He left 2 days ago. He said nothing. He had the look of men who apologize to chairs when they rise." "Name?" "Martin," or he preferred to be called Martin. Men who prefer are often named something else. From the inner office, separated by a glass partition, came the sound of a chair pushed back. The glass showed a blur, a man adjusting a tie as if his fingers liked the habit of it. He was broad in the shoulders in the way jackets are made to flatter. When he stepped out, his mustache was indeed neat, the sort that suggested he had been born believing in mirrors. He saw Maigret and Lucas and gave a small smile like a practiced handshake. "Gentlemen," he said, "I would offer you chairs, but the weather has stolen all the courtesy from Wood today. What can I give you?" "Only your shoes," Maigret said, because sometimes the smallest request unsettled men who were ready to give speeches. "Let me see them." Delmas blinked, then obliged with a theatrical resignation. He put one foot forward. The shoe was well made, black with the matte humility of quality that does not boast, and the heel showed a proud, vertical scar where it had once slid along something that did not forgive. Not deep, not new, but newer than the polish. Along the edge of the sole, a faint grey traced a line, as if brick dust had whispered its name to leather and not been rebuked. "You had a delivery last night," Maigret said, "and a visit to the pension this morning." Delmas's smile did not leave, but it sat down. "I had many things," he said. "This is a city of things and men to carry them. If there is a complaint, the ledger is there to receive it." "The ledger already has," Maigret said. "But that is not what troubles me. It is your jacket, the one you left to dry behind a stove as if it would forget you. And the stitches you did not do well because haste is unflattering." Delmas looked at the secretary, who looked at the pencil which had nothing to add. "If there is a matter," he said, lower now, "we can be men who speak quietly. There is no need to disturb the order of my desk." "It has already been disturbed," Maigret said, "by a man in your suit who woke in your corridor without a name. By a parcel that arrived properly because he is the kind of man who would rather save a fee than be thanked. By shoes that remember what pride makes them do." Delmas's hand made a small movement and then chose stillness. "You have no proof," he said, almost gently. "No," Maigret said. "I have something more troublesome. I have a smell of glue, a bell that speaks in a low voice, a thread that matches a waste bin, and a jacket that tried to pass for kindness. Let us not make them into proof before they wish it. Come with us, please. You can bring your ledger. It will be happier at the quay than I am." Delmas considered refusing and found the act unaesthetic. He took his hat, glanced at his shoes as if to tell them to behave, and nodded to the secretary, who watched him go with the expression of someone marking a place in a book she may not return to. On the stairs, Lucas murmured, "Now." "Not now," Maigret said, feeling the weight of the case settle not uncomfortably in his chest. "We will let the rain do one more thing for us. It makes men honest when they reach a threshold. Their shoes squeak." At the bottom, in the doorway, the rain began again with that apologetic steadiness Paris gives to men who have chosen to be outside. Delmas paused, listening. His shoes announced themselves very softly, like people afraid of waking a child. The man in the oversized suit stood under the awning, watching him, and put a hand to his cuff as if to make sure there was no glass left there to betray him. The bell of a bicycle at the corner gave its small, serious note. Maigret said nothing. It was the kind of morning that preferred to finish a sentence by itself. The ride back to the quay was quiet in the way carriages are in films when men are about to say things they will pretend they did not say. Delmas sat with his hat on his knees as if it were a small, obedient dog. The man in the oversized suit, Martin, until proven otherwise, watched the blur of the wiper with that concentration people give to pendulums when they hope they will be hypnotized into certainty. Lucas had one shoulder turned, half towards them and half to the window, like a man who would catch a sentence if one escaped. On the stone steps the rain had polished. Delmas's shoes made a delicate complaint. It was not loud. It was the whisper of leather speaking with an honesty polish cannot entirely silence. Maigret heard it and did not look down. He let the sound place itself in his head beside the grey smear along the sole and the proud scratch on the heel. They put Delmas in the small room with the stove, as if courtesy were a kind of trap that worked better when it resembled hospitality. The stove ticked as if recalling afternoons it had warmed. Maigret lifted the window a little to let the smell of the river come through, a reminder of things outside papers. He sent for coffee and a glass of beer he did not plan to drink because it pleased him to have both on the table, like two ways a man might answer a question. Delmas drew the chair up with a neat scrape and placed his hat exactly, brim parallel to the table edge. He took out a cigarette case, glanced at Maigret, and put it away. "We will be reasonable," he said, as if giving a speech to a meeting that had not yet elected a chairman. "Tell me yesterday," Maigret said. "In the morning I approved a bill of lading and shouted at a supplier in a voice so calm he thanked me afterward." Delmas began with a little smile that did not ask to be admired. "At 4, 20 bolts to the Quai de la Râpée. At 6, a messenger with the papers, because the post is often unkind to schedules. I dined modestly. I went to the pension. I slept badly because the radiator breathes through its teeth when it rains. In the morning, I discovered my jacket had been stained. Grease, perhaps, from a door here at the quay, and I left it to air in a place where there is a stove. I have many vices. Carelessness is not one." He spread his hands. "If there has been confusion, it is because men who are paid little admire their shoes too much and put them in places where eyes fall." "Which stain?" Maigret asked, as if he had not listened. "On the lapel, or nearer the pocket." "Lap," Delmas began, and then decided against precision. "A stain is a stain." Maigret set the beer nearer to Delmas and the coffee nearer to himself. He did not ask the man to drink. "You keep a room at the pension?" "Occasionally. I am a widower at home with a maid who has opinions about time. The pension does not have opinions. It has keys." "Room 5. If you say so." "I do." He let the sentence rest. The door opened with its particular sigh. Janvier put his head in the way men do when they hope they are interrupting at the right moment. "The boy's name is René," he said. "Jourdan's shop. He confirms the coin, the brown coat, the hand like a shoe. Says the man waited with yesterday's paper because today's ink stains. At the warehouse, the watchman gave us the jacket as described. The quick stitches are recent, and the thread is blue as an afternoon sky no one believes will last." Delmas looked pleased by the word recent, as if recency made all things innocent. "See," he murmured to the table. "And the sub-post office clerk remembers our temporary spoke differently to papers," Janvier added, amused by his own phrase. "He apologized to them. He carried the parcel to the quay himself. He did not return. When the bell rang twice near closing, there was a brown horn button left on the counter. He put a matchbox down. Inside lay the button, ordinary as bread. Delmas examined it without touching. "You have a collection," he said to Maigret blandly. "Shoes tell the truth when they squeak," Maigret said, hearing his wife's voice through his own and finding it suited the room. He rose and went to the door. "Lucas, bring him in." Martin entered as if a wind had pushed him lightly. He stood just inside, hands at his sides, and looked first at the stove as if to be sure of something fixed, then at Delmas's hands, not his face. He did not speak. There was no dramatics to it. It was the steady awkwardness of a man who has borrowed a chair and is afraid to break it. Delmas turned his head with well-bred curiosity, as if introduced to a junior partner of no consequence. "Good morning," he said. "Do we know each other?" Martin swallowed. His eyes moved to the table where the beer and coffee sat like options. He did not trust options. "I carried papers," he said at last, as if continuing a conversation he had left in the rain. "They were stamped. The stamp was crooked. I did not fix it. It is not my place to fix a stamp." "Whose place?" Maigret asked, gentle as a chair. "The man who is proud of his shoes," Martin said promptly, and then, frightened by his own certainty, to the stove. "I am sorry." Delmas's smile arranged itself. "He is ill," he said to Maigret. "You should not trouble him." "It troubles him to be well," Maigret said. "Sit nearer the stove, Martin. It will help you find the words that did not come in out of the rain with you." He waited while the man took a half step, the little scrape of a sole on tile very soft. "In the afternoon you went to the quay. In the evening." "I was told to come again," Martin said, "because a number had been entered without a thing to stand on." That is how he said it. "It has no footing," he said. I asked, "Is it wrong?" He said, "It is right when it stands," and looked at his shoes. He frowned, working at the memory like a knot. "He gave me a jacket because I was cold, but it did not belong to me. I sewed it where it would fall if I moved. The needle bent. I'm not good with needles." "Where did you sew?" Maigret asked, though he already had the jacket's lapel between his fingers in his head. "Inside," Martin said, touching his own chest carefully, "to make it look like a jacket and not a curtain." Delmas laughed softly. "He's thinking of a story," he said. "He has been in the rain." "You admire your shoes in glass," Maigret said to him, as if the conversation had not split. "You read figures while you do it. You stand closer to the pane than seems necessary." "I have been accused of worse. Last night you were seen by the watchman, who coughs when he does not like men who stand too close to panes. You left a scratch on your heel this week, not deep, not old. The brick did not forgive. You brought back your jacket to the warehouse in the morning to dry it, because it had remembered the cleaner's petrol." He spoke without heat, as if listing the contents of a cupboard. Delmas's fingers were quiet on his hat brim. Only the moustache acknowledged unease. It straightened as if to see better. "You have an affection for details," he said. His voice had grown softer, not warmer. "But details have no hearts." "They have habits," Maigret said, "and habits are what people have when they say they have character." The door sighed again. Lognon filled it with gloom that was almost a coat. He glanced at the arrangement of men and then, with the satisfaction of a man bringing a cloud to a picnic, put a small envelope on the table. "From the agency," he said. "Our temporary's file. His name is not Martin, not in any way that suits the ledger. Michel Armand. He has had factories that coughed him out for liking to save. Boss's money. He does not keep jobs. He apologizes to chairs when he leaves them." "Michel," Martin said, testing it like a borrowed spoon. He nodded, then shook his head at his own nod, the body doing both at once. "It might be mine. I'm sorry." "And Fournier?" Maigret asked without looking at Lognon. "Has a cousin in the Marais who has never seen him," Lognon reported, with the bleak joy of a man whose suspicions have been fed a biscuit. "He went out at 6:30 to the cleaner and to the bicycle shop and then home. He bought nothing but time and looked at his watch incorrectly on purpose when asked the hour by a woman in the street. He plays at stories too," Maigret murmured, "but he does not sew." Lognon's eyebrows went up. "He says the same." "He may be telling the truth for once," Maigret said. He let the room be quiet a while, the stove obliged by ticking once, louder, like a word spoken in a church where no one expects it. Delmas did not fidget, which is its own kind of fidgeting. Martin, Michel, held his hands so politely they looked like instruments no one had taught him. "Here is what I think," Maigret said finally, almost conversational. "You do business close to the bone, Monsieur Delmas. You keep a ledger that likes to see numbers stand on 2 feet. Yesterday you sent 20 bolts to the quay and a parcel with papers that said they were what would make the numbers stand. In the afternoon, our careful man took the parcel because he does not like waste. In the evening, something in the ledger did not look like itself anymore. Perhaps a fee that ought to be paid wanted to be smaller. Perhaps a weight wanted to be lighter. There was a number that would stand if a page were folded differently. You went to the quay, admired your shoes in the office glass, waited until coughing made you go away. Later, you opened a sash that sticks and left a little glass in a sleeve that was not yours. Our careful man came because you asked him. He climbed where you said, or he followed you along a corridor where men like to sleep. I do not know yet when the needle bent or when the jacket found the stove, but I know a suit tried to be 2 men for a night and failed at being either. Delmas's eyes did not move, which is a way eyes move when they are busy. You are fond of parables, he said. They are easier on the heirs, Maigret said. Facts kick. He pushed the beer a little nearer until the glass made a sound on the table. Drink. Delmas hesitated as if aware a simple thing can turn to evidence in the wrong mouth. He took the glass, sipped, found it adequate, and set it down with care. The boy with the bell, Maigret added, likes coins that surprise him. He will not forget your hand. The concierge will not forget a key that was replaced by string so emptiness would not draw attention. The watchman will not forget proud shoes that pretended to study rates. And this man, he inclined his head toward Michel, will not forget the word footing even if he cannot yet place which number wanted it. It will come. I do not have to help you make poetry, Delmas said. His voice was agreeable, then less so at the end. If there is a charge, bring it. If not, I have lunch to return to. Maigret shook his head, slow enough to be mistaken for thought. You will return to the pension with us, he said. We will stand in your corridor, and we will listen to the house. We will open the window that sticks and look at the brick where shoes leave honest marks. We will ask your jacket to point to the place where it tried to be your shape on a smaller man. If the house is generous, it will remember for you. If not, we will have coffee with Madame Vachon and let her beads tell us the hour you like to come and go. Delmas's mouth quirked at beads, then flattened again. As you wish. Maigret did not hurry them. He stood a moment, looking at the rain beyond the window, at the way the drops made the river's skin mottled like a fish. He thought of his wife's sentence again and decided it would be useful a second time. On the corridor's tiles, their shoes made their little truths, a pair that whispered, a pair that did not know what to say, a pair that did its best not to speak at all. At the foot of the steps, a bicycle rattled past and gave its low, serious note for the sake of habit rather than warning. The boy, René, was probably near the corner, finding the weather important. Maigret put his hat on and became large in the doorway because that is what doors expect of him. He let the others file out and followed, not because he wished to control the moment, but because sometimes it is useful to watch how men fill a street before it fills them. On the pavement, Delmas paused again on the threshold the way careful men do, as if a door were a legal border. His shoes took in a thread of water and squeaked each to each, small, honest sounds. Michel, hearing it, blinked once as if someone had opened a drawer in his head and a label fluttered. He put a hand to his temple, not theatrically, simply to keep something from escaping. "What is it?" Maigret asked, but not as a challenge. Michel looked at the ground, then at Delmas's shoes, then past them towards a memory that had decided to stand on its own feet. "He said," Michel whispered, "that numbers mustn't squeak." Delmas's mouth opened to make a word and chose not to. It was not yet an admission. It was a man tasting the shape of a thing he had told himself would keep still. The rain went on with its patient work, filling in the pauses. Maigret stepped aside to let the city do what it does best to men who rush. Make them wait. They did not speak as they crossed the river. The taxi's heater was unreliable and made a sound like a man politely clearing his throat and then giving up. Delmas watched his own reflection in the glass when the light fell right, as if to make sure the face he carried into rooms was still the one he preferred. Michel, the name sat lightly on him now, as if it would stay if not crowded, studied the blur of buildings the way careful men read ledgers, line by line, unwilling to skip. At the pension, the hall smelled of damp wool and Madame Vachon's coffee, which had grown more stern as the morning lengthened. The beads at her throat were darker again. Rain does that to beads. She saw Delmas and gave the kind of nod one reserves for tenants who bring in their own weather. Her eyes slid to Michel, and then to the blue thread clinging obstinately to the cuff of the abandoned jacket draped over Maigret's arm. She did not ask questions. She tightened her mouth in a way that meant she had already answered them for herself, but would allow others to fill in the dates and times to keep polite. "We'll be upstairs a moment," Maigret told her. He said it as if they were going to visit a relative who would not thank them. On the second-floor landing, the runner remembered where the bucket had gone over earlier. Damp had dried into a shadow. Between that shadow and the window, the fabric showed a faint, fresh scuff in the direction of room 5, the sort of mark shoes make when they admit they are not new. Maigret bent and pinched the runner's edge again, not so much to look as to feel whether the house would recognize the gesture and offer something in return. Under the corner, a crescent new since morning marred the dust's small, even nap. Someone had learned to lift and set the carpet gently, and then someone else had learned to do it less gently. Houses accumulate such small educations. He opened the sticking window. It protested in its usual way. The light well breathed on them, wet brick, old soap, faint metal. He watched Delmas without appearing to, the habitual way a man glances at a weather vane and takes his temperature from it. Delmas kept his distance, no more than any tidy man would. His shoes, on the runner, made the small, dignified sounds of leather that would not be hurried. "In there," Maigret said, and let the door of room 5 take his weight a little before yielding. The room was as it had been, but rooms change when the people they belong to stand in them. Delmas paused just inside, the way men of order pause before their own desks. A habit, a counting of objects. His eyes went to the chalk square by instinct, and then declined to notice it. Michael's gaze found the bedspread's neat impression where that larger hand had once pressed down, and his face altered in that small way faces do when memory reaches across and taps from behind. "Don't trouble yourselves with proof," Delmas said lightly. It was the tone of a man offering cigarettes when he knows there are none in his case. If there were anything here, it would be of interest only to the laundress. "The laundress has already had her say," Maigret told him. He laid the jacket over the chair back and touched the quick blue stitches without possessiveness. "Tell me how long it takes you to sew that many in a dim room with other people's breathing in the corridor." Delmas smiled, because smiling had always carried him through similar questions. "I do not sew." "No," Maigret agreed. He did not look at Michel when he said it, but Michel's hands twitched, a small, honest betrayal. "Monsieur Fournier does not sew either," he went on, as if remarking on the weather. "He performs with chalk and thread ends the way a salesman performs with samples." He left the whiskers on the doormat when he had second thoughts about where shoes belong. "It is an odd house," he added, to no one. It rewards second thoughts with a mark. Lucas had been drifting, leaning his shoulder to different patches of wall as if listening to the plaster itself. He bent now and, with a negligible sound, fished from under the bed frame a needle curved beyond comfort and, still caught in its bent eye, a last short blue hair. He held it up. If Delmas's face noticed it, his mustache did not admit the fact. Michel's breath made a brief, dry sound and stopped. "Where were you last night at 11? Maigret asked Delmas, his voice a little tired. a little kind, as if it had come a long way and was prepared to go a little farther if the road insisted. "In this room," Delmas said, "I make a virtue of regularity. Ask Madame Vachon. She can describe the exact places in which my virtues occur." "Madame Vachon can describe how you make your bed," Maigret said, "because you like to say that you do, and some men polish their sentences the way they polish their shoes. But she cannot say if you stood by this window with it open a finger's width and told a man to climb like a cat, because she believes houses do not do such things." He turned to Michel. "Did you climb?" Michel's eyes went to the sill as if it were a stage he had seen from the stalls but never stepped upon. He put a cautious hand to his cuff, found nothing there now but the ghost of a prickle, and let the hand fall. I put my hand there," he said. He showed them, broad palm to wood, the way the dust on the sill remembered. His hand shook once, the way the cup had shaken earlier in the little room at the quay. "And your shoes?" Maigret asked. "I took them off," Michel said readily, with relief at being able to give a peace without lying. "I do not like to make noise where people sleep." He looked at Delmas then, just for a moment, hesitant as a clerk who believes it is not his place and speaks anyway. "You said numbers mustn't squeak." Delmas's eyes did a very small thing. They looked away and then back as if fog had lifted and settled again. "It is a figure of speech," he said, still light as he could make it. "Numbers don't mind squeaking," Lucas offered with a grin that did not quite happen. "It is men who worry about it." From the doorway there was the discreet rustle of beads. Madame Vachon had come up the stairs the way certain women always do when there are men talking sense in their house. Not to interrupt, but to put the house on their side. She stood with her hand on the jamb and looked at the bedspread, then at the jacket on the chair. "The sleeve," she said, "to no one in particular. I mended a tear there last year for a tenant who would rather I hadn't seen it. Men think houses do not notice, but cloth tells a story to anyone with a needle." She drew her fingers along the air where the seam lay. "The man who sat in that jacket last night was smaller than the jacket wished. It puckered here." She pinched the air. Her eyes, for the first time, rested with frank dislike on Delmas. A man who wears a jacket well shouldn't let it be treated so. Her tone contained an idea like a pin. Delmas's composure pricked itself upon it. "Do you propose to teach me to wear my clothes?" he asked, almost laughing. "I propose nothing," she said. "I make coffee." "I see. That is enough to make me unkind to men who make other men foolish for their convenience." She turned away with a little lift of the chin that counted as triumph in women who will not be thanked. Something in the shape of her remark struck a quiet chord in Michel. He lifted his hands as if to catch a phrase landing. "You said," he murmured to the room, to the window, to the jacket, "that if anyone came I was to look like a child." His mouth opened, closed. He swallowed once. The next words came slow, heavy. "You moved the chair against the floor and told me to lie with my hand under my cheek. Like a child, you said, because children are forgiven for sleeping anywhere, even in corridors." He looked at Delmas as if surprised the man still had a body. "I am not a child." Delmas opened his hands, patient, the way one indulges clerks who have become sentimental. "No one said you were," he began. Maigret did not look away from Michel. "And the parcel?" he asked. "The seal," Michel said at once, grateful for a task. "It had a scratch. It was a bad seal. I carried it and did not let it swing. He told me which door. He said the bell would be low and that I must ring twice and then put it on the counter if no one came. When I came back, he had changed his shoes. He said I had done well." "He changed his shoes?" Lucas said too quickly. Michel nodded. "He polishes even when there is no need. He admires." His face worked. There was a struggle, the body trying to resist whatever the mind was going to recall. "He said he had gone by the warehouse to make sure I had not been clumsy, because men like me are clumsy," he said, without meaning to be. "I said I was not clumsy, and then I do not remember, and then there was the corridor." and the window, and a sound like numbers being written faster than the hand likes to write them. He lifted his hands helplessly, and the helplessness took him by the throat. He sat down on the bed without noticing he had decided to, and began to cry. It was not a loud crying. It had the embarrassed rhythm of a man who has not done this since he was smaller and less careful. His shoulders moved once, twice, and then the sound was the same as the rain on the light well. A steady, private business. Madame Vachon, who had not planned to forgive anyone, stepped back into the room long enough to put her hand briefly on his shoulder, as if to mark him on the inventory of the world as something to be kept and not thrown away. Delmas looked as men look when a ledger blots ink on a neat page. He glanced at Maigret, as if to appeal to a referee's sense of decorum. "This is unnecessary," he said softly. "He will tire himself. You'll get nothing that is not already yours." "We have enough," Maigret said. He kept his voice on that low rail lines taken by trains at night. A jacket that does not belong where it was, a window that sticks for everyone and yet was open twice, a boy who likes coins, a watchman who hears shoes pretending to read rates, a clerk who saves his employer's money and is thanked with sleep in a corridor. And more tedious than any of those, a habit. He turned his head toward Delmas. "You do not like squeaks, monsieur. You smooth things, the numbers, the edges of paper, the look of a man ill at ease in a suit. It is not a vice to prefer the world to be neat. It becomes one when you push other men into corners to make your neatness possible." Delmas let out a breath through his nose. It could have been amusement. It could have been surrender's first cousin. "You will explain this to a magistrate?" he asked mildly. "I will explain nothing," Maigret said. "I will bring you to a room where there is a table and a pen that scratches and a man who asks whether a seal was broken by negligence or on purpose, whether a ledger wanted to be pleasing too much, whether a sash's grease got onto a lapel because night air was refreshing, or because night is simpler when one wishes to be unseen. I will sit while you speak to him. He will prefer you to be dull. You are good at being dull when you wish." Michel's crying had slowed of its own accord, not because he had decided, but because the body insists on breathing between regrets. He looked up, eyes red without drama. "I was not wrong," he said to the room. "I was only useful." "Yes," Maigret said, and there was no pity in it, only the weary recognition one gives to a fact that is not going to move. Sometimes that is the worst one can be to certain men. From below came the small, polite sound of a bell, a bicycle at the corner announcing itself to no one who needed telling. The house took the sound and kept some of it, made a modest echo in the stairwell. Maigret walked to the window and closed it, this time carefully, feeling the paint's resistance and letting it settle into its place. He turned back and found Delmas in the attitude of a man waiting for a train he knows will be late and intends to appear gracious about. "Lucas," he said, without raising his voice, "fetch Fournier. He will like to tell us what he can do with chalk that is not drawing a seam. And then we will go to the quay and let the stove tick for us until the afternoon has put on a face it can keep." Lucas went. Madame Vachon, who liked order, straightened the jacket on the chair with quick, disapproving fingers, as if it were a guest that had spoken out of turn. The beads at her throat made a small sound when she moved, a notation, not quite music. Michel stood, rubbed his palms dry on the thighs of the suit that did not belong to him, and managed a small, apologetic tilt of the head toward Delmas, as if to excuse himself for being the wrong shape in the wrong clothes. On the landing, the runner received their steps without argument. Delmas paused at the keyboard and, perhaps from habit, perhaps to assert some tiny sovereignty, set the loop of string on its hook straighter, the way a man corrects a picture that is not crooked. He met Maigret's eyes a moment. Not a challenge, not a plea. The look of a man considering whether silence could still be arranged to look like dignity. He found no purchase there and looked away, toward the stairs, where rain dimmed the light as if the day had put a shade on. "After you," Maigret said. It was not courtesy so much as a way of letting the house deliver its own verdict in the small squeak the shoes made on the bottom step. The honest sound followed them down like a witness that had decided, at last, to speak. They waited in the dining room because houses prefer you to wait where the coffee has left a mark. Madame Vachon banged cups a little more than was necessary, the way some women make noise to keep a room from thinking too loudly. The widow had taken up her spoon again and held it upright as if prayer were a habit the wrist understood even when the mind wandered. Mademoiselle Bernard graded nothing in the air with her forefinger. She kept her gaze on the window where the rain made the light well glass look powdered. Delmas stood, not from nerves, but from habit. Men who live by ledgers do not sit when they can stand and count. He placed his hat on the chair back so the brim would not be bruised. Michel sat by the stove with his hands on his knees, like a boy told to stay clean before a visit. Every so often, he glanced at the door as if a kettle behind it might have started to sing and needed someone to notice. Fournier arrived with a politeness he had polished for more fortunate afternoons. Lucas brought him in with a look that said he'd found him where men who avoid events like to linger, half a block away under a shop awning, reading a timetable that did not pretend to be wrong this time. "Ah," Fournier said, seeing the group and arranging his smile to be general. "We are convened." "Just so," Maigret said. He did not move from where he stood, a little to one side, where the oilcloth shine did not throw light up under a man's chin and make him look like a liar. "You fetched a suit yesterday?" Fournier's eyes slid to Delmas and back. "I did an errand. We do each other small services, all of us. It oils the city." "For whom?" "For the concierge." He tried too quickly and let it go with a sigh that argued he had not meant to make a production. "For Monsieur Delmas," he said. "He asked. He said he would be at work late and disliked to wait on cleaning hours." "You left it with Madame Vachon?" "I did," Fournier said, grateful for a fact he could hold. "And I left." He stopped. His neatness had betrayed him. "A packet of needles for my own shirt," he tried again. "You do not sew," Lucas reminded him gently. "No," Fournier admitted, amused despite himself, and then grew serious in the way men do when they step on the edge of something not flat. He asked if I had thread. Blue would do. I gave him a card of it. A salesman has thread the way a barber has powder. "Props." "And why blue?" Maigret asked. "Because blue is not noticed," Fournier said, with a little philosophy he had been saving. "Black looks deliberate. White is vain. Blue pretends to belong to shadows." He said. He glanced at Delmas, then went on. "He said it was to stop a sleeve making a fool of a man in a doorway." Delmas's face did not change, but the mustache made an imperceptible correction, the way a line under a figure is drawn again harder without meaning to. "You saw him sew?" Maigret asked. "No," Fournier said, relieved. "I am not brave enough to trust my eyes when men are busy pretending to be ordinary. I heard a chair moved, a scrape near a window, a phrase, like a child, and the soft swear men make when a needle resists. I went to my room because I am not a friend of complications." He tried to laugh and found it soundless. "You admired his shoes this morning," the widow said suddenly, surprising herself. All eyes turned. She tightened her mouth. "I tidy the hall. A man who looks at his shoes before he says good morning is either in love or in trouble." Delmas made a small bow in her direction. "There are worse witnesses," he said pleasantly. "Let us go," Maigret said, as if the room had brought him to a platform at last. He did not look at Delmas when he spoke. "To the quay." They went out the slow way, which is how truth prefers to leave houses. On the steps, Delmas paused with that carefulness he had for thresholds. The leather gave its small confession again. Michel glanced down as if to apologize to the sound for being true. The rain, having decided to behave, came in fine lines now, the sort tailors call a good cloth. At the quay, the stoves ticking sounded like an old man keeping a promised appointment with his lungs. Maigret set the chair for Delmas, slightly crooked. A certain kind of man cannot resist putting a crooked thing right, and he wanted to see whether Delmas's hand would move without his permission. It did, very slightly, and then stopped, trained politeness wrestling with reflex. Michel took the same place as before on the bench. A man keeps to his bench the second time if he wasn't scolded for it the first. "We'll keep it plain," Maigret said. "No thunder. Tell it as it was, and we will agree together which parts are crimes and which are sins, and which, tiresome as it is, are only habits." Delmas rested his fingertips on his hat, as if to make a small tent over it. "The 20 bolts were under-invoiced," he said, almost cheerfully, in the tone of a man confessing to prefer his soup too salty. A long-standing arrangement with a supplier who believes taxes are a conversation, not a rule. "I do not like arrangements. They are squeaky. I prefer numbers that do not call attention to themselves. The customs letter, as sent, made the squeak worse. The weight." He gestured with 2 fingers as if holding a slender line. "Was hopeful." "So you corrected hope," Maigret said. "I corrected the appearance of hope," Delmas said evenly. "I sent a second letter that would sit better in a ledger. Still an offense, if you wish to be tiresome, but less optimistic. I asked the temporary clerk to carry it, because he has the air that makes doors open and no one asks the wrong questions. He believes in usefulness. It is written on his hands. He delivered it. That should have been the end." "And yet," Maigret said, "and yet the watchman coughed, and the foreman has an ear for shoes, and I have enemies among those who like mess because their accounts live in it." The voice did not sharpen. He did not allow himself that. So I checked. I dislike to be surprised by fools. I looked through the window and saw the paper where it should be. I went away. The next morning there was a jacket that smelled of petrol because I am an idiot who brushed against a door that should be cleaned if the city employed better men. The jacket, Janvier said from the doorway, having slipped in with the talent of a cat, was found on a barrow because a boy put it there like a flower on a grave. He placed the jacket on the table as if it might remember something if its elbows touched wood. Delmas's mouth moved, then did not. He looked at Michel. "I meant only to keep you from catching cold," he said. For the first time, the pronoun had a subject that wasn't himself. Michel shook his head. Not in refusal, only the body's modest attempt to say it had not asked for this. "You said to be a child if anyone came." "I said." Delmas stopped. There was the smallest of cracks in the voice now, the hairline one hears in a glass after it has been set down a bit too hard. "I said to lie because panic looks worse than sleep. You do not understand how ugly panic is in a corridor. People remember it in ways that are no use to anyone." "You left him," Lucas said, not accusingly, only setting a piece where it belonged. "I left him," Delmas agreed, almost grateful to have it said. "He would have gone home if I had woken him. The concierge would have had a story with a poor hero, and poor heroes make better enemies than guilty men. I chose. Badly." He took a breath as if to fill his chest with air that belonged to no one. "There is no murder in it, Inspector. If there were, I would have dressed it better." "Some things cannot be tailored," Maigret said. He let the silence that followed be long enough for the stove to sigh and for Janvier to find the right place on the wall to lean. Fournier, who had prided himself on performing well in rooms where other men were important, had been standing without knowing where to put his hands. He found his mouth now. "He spoke to me," he said, and did not specify which he meant. "He said being near certain men would teach me to count properly. I wanted—" He looked down and saw the truth waiting for him like a lost cuff-link. "I wanted to be in the circle where things are arranged. I thought there was a ticket if one was useful. When he asked for the thread, I felt chosen. Do you understand how ridiculous that is?" "It is ordinary," Maigret said. "Ridiculous is another word for common when it is dressed up." He turned to Delmas again. There will be charges. Falsification, perhaps collusion. Not spectacular ones. You will not be important to any newspaper that likes a headline. But the magistrate will not be bored if you give him something human to dislike. I can give him accuracy, Delmas said. He will prefer it. You can give him both, Maigret said, and looked past him to Michel, whose eyes had gone red again at the corners, but who kept them fierce as if daring the wet to become tears. You will go home, he told Michel. Not to the agency. To the place you call your own. You will come back tomorrow and tell the clerk at Rue Saint-Gilles exactly what door you rang, and exactly what you heard. You will bring the word footing with you if it asks to come. No one will ask you to be a child again. Michel's lips moved, formed a thank you, found it too large, and made do with a small nod that was stronger than the word would have been. He rose and then sat again, embarrassed at his own attempt to end the scene. From the corridor there came an unhurried tread, and, with it, the gloomy silhouette that meant Lognon had been sent to collect anything the room had finished with. He looked at the jacket, at the bent needle that Lucas had set on the mantel in a matchbox, at Delmas's hat hands, at Michel's knees. "Do I write," he said, "that a man used another man like a pin to hold, cloth to a form?" "You write," Maigret said, "that a man disliked noise so much he made more of it than there would have been if he had let the numbers squeak for a day." He glanced at Delmas. "You will come now." Delmas rose, placed his hat on his head with the exactness of a man who gives himself that one kindness, and looked around the room as if to check that it would not be improved by any last gesture. "The magazines will not come," he said lightly. "You may miss them," Maigret replied. As they stepped into the corridor, a messenger from the front desk intercepted them with a slip. "For you, Chief," he said. Maigret read the quick pencil. A call from Rue Saint-Maur. The cleaner's girl remembered a stain not of grease but of wax, sealing wax, along the lapel seam, red at first, then rubbed to brown. He folded the paper and put it into his pocket without changing his face. "Wax," he said to no one, and to the room in his head where all the small things kept company. A seal that did not like its place. Delmas did not turn. "Stupid of me," he said. "I used a sleeve to hide what my fingers had already touched. A tailor would have laughed." "Tailors we have enough of," Maigret said. "It is the men they dress who keep us busy." On the steps the rain had forgotten itself again and fallen back into drizzle. The courtyard smelled of rope and river and something sweet. Someone had opened a tin of evaporated milk in the canteen, and its scent drifted with shameless cheerfulness beneath the door. Michel paused, breathing it like a man who had learned long ago to take warmth where it floats. "I will go home," he said aloud, surprising himself. "I will buy a roll from the baker with the serious bell." "Do that," Maigret said. "Walk in your own shoes." Delmas's shoes gave their final little truth on the last step. He noticed it now and almost smiled, as if he had met at last the only opponent in the matter who had remained innocent throughout. He did not say anything, to the shoes or to the men. He straightened his cuffs. The handcuffs, when they came out of Lucas's pocket, were treated like any other metal thing that works for a living, without ceremony. Delmas looked at them and then at Maigret as one looks at rain, with acceptance born of long acquaintance. "It will be quiet," Maigret said, almost kindly as they crossed the yard. "You will like that." In the office window the river showed itself in points of pewter where the drops struck. Maigret stood a moment and watched the pattern. He thought of Madame Maigret rinsing a cup, of the boy René discovering that bells tell the truth about a street, of the foreman who could hear pride in a heel, of a thread the color of shadows, of a loop of string where a key should be. None of it grand, all of it enough. He took his pipe from his pocket, filled it, did not light it, and felt beneath his thumb the slight, familiar roughness where the bowl had been knocked too carelessly once years ago. A flaw that had long ago settled into being part of the thing. He smiled, not at himself, and at last reached for a match. By mid-afternoon, the quay had settled back into its temperament. Clerks spoke in the narrow voices of men who measure their days in stamps. The rain thinned and fattened without asking permission. Maigret finished the match, drew on the pipe until the tobacco made that small consenting sound, and rang the examining magistrate. There was no drama in the call, a ledger matter, a customs letter corrected after the fact, a man who liked to tidy the world so it would not speak out of turn. The magistrate, who disliked surprises even more than Delmas did, agreed to see the file in the morning. He preferred mornings. Ink behaves better. Longyon took this as a personal slight from the universe. "A box of papers and a gentleman who hates squeaks," he muttered, writing the charge with an injured pen. "We arrest men for less and feel nobler." He had, to be fair, shaved for murder. "You will look fine in the report," Maigret said, not unkindly. "Write that the seal did not like the sleeve." Janvier drifted through with the ease of a cat at home. "The girl at the cleaner is pleased to have remembered Wax," he said. "She says she will tell her mother every time she sees a jacket now. The watchman has gone from saying he heard 2 men to being certain he heard 2 shoes. At Rue Saint-Gilles, they have made a space for Michel behind the grill if he wishes to come back tomorrow to speak slowly for the ledger." Michel came back without being asked. He had washed his face at a sink somewhere and combed his hair as if order would apologize for him. He stood at the doorway until someone remembered to wave him to the bench. "I went by the post," he said, uninvited, almost urgent. "I looked at the bell. It makes the same sound. I told them I tied too quickly sometimes, and they said, 'That is not a crime.'" "It isn't," Maigret said. "Sit." He wrote names without impatience. The boy René, with his serious bell, the cleaner's girl with her low iron and red nails, the foreman who smelled impatience in rooms, the watchman who coughed when men admired themselves. Fournier took his turn with a care that looked like honesty because, for the first time that day, it was. He spoke of feeling chosen, of blue thread that belongs to shadows, of the small glory of being included in another man's method. "You will give a statement and go home," Maigret told him. "You will also stop pretending timetables have misprints when they have only hours." Fournier colored like a boy whose trick has been spotted by a kind teacher. "Do I lose my room?" "If you keep your shoes where they belong, and your chalk for seams, no," Maigret said. "If you lend thread again without asking what story it is sewing, perhaps. You're not built for stories." Fournier swallowed his gratitude as if it were too large and nodded. Delmas waited with the patience of a man who weighs bargains. He had sent his secretary a note, the kind with 2 lines and a word that means continue. He had refused cigarettes twice and then remembered they were not offered. When Maigret came back to him, he had arranged his hands as if they were proof that symmetry existed. "You took the key," Maigret said, from the board. "I did not wish a question when I came late," Delmas said. "The woman enjoys being asked questions. It gives her the posture of a queen. I like queens to be surprised." "You hung string so emptiness would behave," Maigret said. "How long will you pretend you do not like the picture straight?" Delmas's mouth made the ghost of a smile and abandoned it. "There are worse crimes." "There are," Maigret agreed. "Today we have only yours." He let the man alone with the stove then and went to the little room where phones make their own weather. He called Madame Maigret because the body remembers stew at certain hours. She did not ask for an inventory. She never did. But she said, "Do not leave your jacket where men put their elbows." And he said, "It is under guard." And they both were satisfied by the exchange. In the outer office, the boy René stood on one foot and then the other with the solemnity of a messenger who has discovered he can make grown men listen. Lucas had fetched him to make his statement round. He spoke carefully to the clerk as if dictating a postcard to an aunt. The coin, the brown coat, the hand like a shoe, the paper from the wrong day, the jacket placed on the barrow's handle because Things look more honest when they hang, which was perhaps the truest sentence spoken in the building all week. When the worst of the writing was done and the day had folded itself toward evening, Maigret took his hat from the peg and went back up the corridor to the small room. The stove ticked with the savings of coal men had not used in winter. Delmas looked up with the courtesy of someone receiving visitors in his drawing room. "You will sleep here," Maigret said. "I have slept in worse places," Delmas answered. "Rooms with radiators that breathe through their teeth." "You prefer order to comfort," Maigret said. They rarely arrived together. Delmas shrugged. "Order is a comfort. To some of us." "You might have asked him to stand and leave," Maigret said, not with anger, but as if he were giving a fact a chair. "You might have told him that men who save fees don't owe anyone sleep in corridors." Delmas considered this as one considers an arithmetic error after one has made it into fact. "I chose badly," he repeated, as if repetition would change the weight of the sentence, and then, almost annoyed with himself, added, "I dislike panic." "Then stop causing it," Maigret said, and left him with the stove. The rain remembered itself as night came, and the river took on that damp light it keeps for men who are still at their desks after the city has decided to sit. In the dining room of the pension, the widow had put her spoon down and looked less offended by prayer than earlier. Mademoiselle Bernard hummed scales into her cup. Madame Vachon had changed beads again, dark as licorice now, and had forgiven the house for what men had asked of it. Michel appeared in the doorway with his hat in both hands, the way poor relations appear before good tables. He had a coat that belonged to him now. Someone had found it at the agency, humble and thin. It fit. He looked at Maigret with the shy triumph of someone permitted to speak his own name with less apology. "I am to return tomorrow," he said. "The clerk will show me where to sign, without making the ink tired." "Go home," Maigret told him. "Buy your roll. Walk by the bell to hear it tell you the street belongs to you." Michel nodded and went, lighter by the weight of nothing more than permission. Outside, Fournier stood under the awning again, holding a folded timetable, but not reading it. He watched the rain with the sober affection of men who have learned that weather is not personal. "Am I still a man of the house?" he asked as Maigret came by, meaning the pension, meaning Paris, meaning rooms where men come and go. "You're a man who is learning where to put his thread," Maigret said, starting the pipe again. "It is enough for today." Fournier laughed once, softly, as if not to wake anyone, and tipped his hat in a way that, for once, had nothing to do with performance. In his flat, the kitchen window still wore its film of condensation, and the street below had shaken itself down to the small necessities. A woman with a sack of potatoes, a dog considering a puddle, a boy practicing his bell with the dignity of a maestro who knows the right note when he hears it. Madame Maigret set the stew on the table, wiped her hands, and inspected his sleeve for stains he might not have noticed. "You have wax on your cuff," she said at once, with a disapproval that belonged to the wax and not to him. "It belongs to another man," he said. "It is a habit." It moved. She poured him beer in a glass that knew his hand. "He dislikes squeaks," she said after a while, not as a question. She took her chair in that swift, practiced way that made it seem she had been sitting a moment before. "He disliked them enough to make more," he said. "He would have dressed murder and made it look like laundry forgotten on a barrow." "But he did not murder," she said, not so much asking as putting the piece down in its place. "No," he said. "He folded things that should have been left to stand up by themselves. He wanted numbers to walk on carpet." "And the man in the suit?" "Michel," he said, and it pleased him to say a name that had waited too long to attach. "He will be all right. He is built to be useful. One must teach such men to be useful to themselves first. It is not in the curriculum." She nodded, a small private acceptance of the world's syllabus. They ate without hurry. The stew had the honest authority of things that take time to become themselves. When he had finished, he went to the window again and stood with his elbows on the sill. The bell below gave its low, serious note, and then another, for practice, and then kept quiet, because one must not speak too often if one wishes to be believed. He thought of the room at the pension, of the quick blue stitches that had tried to force cloth to tell a lie politely, of the bent needle tucked under the bed, of the loop of string straightened by a man who thought straightening was the same as rightness, of a shoe's small confession on a step, of wax rubbed brown against a lapel because appearances cannot help themselves, of a stove that ticked through other men's afternoons. He did not think of justice as a weight that had been dropped and now sat immovable. It was not that sort of case. It was smaller and therefore more like life. He washed his hands, pipe and all, and dried them on the towel by the stove. Madame Maigret looked up. "Tomorrow?" she asked. "Statements," he said. "A magistrate who prefers mornings. A ledger with a corrected hope." He smiled a little. "And perhaps a new suit for a man who has been wearing someone else's shape." "Buy him a belt," she said. "Belts are kinder than thread." He laughed under his breath and found that he was tired in the good way, as if the day had asked him to stand in the right places, and he had done so. On the street, the rain decided to stop for a minute, maybe two. A draft moved through the flat, honest air, unperfumed, and the window pane cleared enough for the city to look back at itself and be pleased without saying so. The telephone did not ring. The stove made one last remark, and then kept its counsel. He let the quiet be itself, which is an art in houses like his. Somewhere in the building, a neighbor set a chair down gently, a man who knew wood remembers. He thought, blue suits, black shoes, red wax rubbed to brown. Things that change their names for a day and then go back to what they were. He finished the beer that had gone a little flat and did not complain. The evening seemed content with half answers, which is often the most one can do for it. When he went to bed, the pipe on the night table still smelled faintly of the morning's first fill. He put a hand on it as one pats a shoulder, and slept the sleep of men who have added a small square of order to a ledger that did not require balance to be beautiful. Morning made the city look as if it had slept with a book on its face and only half remembered the plot. The rain had stopped long enough to leave damp seams along the pavements, and the river held a calm that looked deliberate. At the quay the clerks arrived with their collars already weary of being straight, and the stove woke with a short, embarrassed tick as if apologizing for continuing to exist. The examining magistrate took them at 9 because ink behaves better. He had a desk that seemed to have been designed to keep visitors at a respectful distance from his appointments with paper. Delmas stood as he always did, composed without making a virtue of it. He had slept, or at least contrived, to make his face say that sleep and he were on speaking terms. Michel sat where he was told, his hat on his knees. He had found, since yesterday, a jacket of his own, thin but obedient. Fournier put his hands together as if prayer might make them look less idle. The magistrate listened more with his pen than his ears, making little notes that had the sound of patience. "Under-invoicing," he said once, as if tasting something familiar and finding the spice off. A supplemental paper carried outside proper channels, a correction performed when no one asked, and you— He glanced at Michel without malice. "Being useful?" Michel nodded, grateful to be seen without being examined. Delmas spoke in a tone that offered the court a clean kerchief, not a handkerchief already wrung. "I wished for order," he said. "I corrected a hope that had overreached its legs. I made an error in what I asked of a man who wanted to be helpful. I preferred sleep to panic in a corridor. These are not crimes of great imagination." "They are not," the magistrate agreed, writing something that sounded like a verdict that knew its own size. "They are the sort of things that make a magistrate necessary." He took Delmas's statement with the economy of a man who expects to read it again later, in chambers, with coffee that has gone cold. He took Michel's with care, slowing him once or twice, not out of impatience but to give the words a place to live. When Michel said, "He told me numbers mustn't squeak," the pen did not lift. It made a mark that looked like the kind of smile pens make. Fournier's contribution weighed less on the page than in his mind. "I lent thread," he said, and one could see him finding the ridiculousness freshly with each repetition. "I wanted to be considered competent." "You are," the magistrate said, without irony. "In your profession, keep to the limits of it and you will die agreeable." Lognon, who had put on a tie that imagined it would be noticed, looked injured when the charge settled around words like falsification and fraudulent adjustment, and not at all around others he had prepared himself for. "It will not look much in a paper," he whispered to Maigret as they stood aside, while seals went on envelopes with an authority wax seldom deserves. "It will look like work," Maigret said. "Work fills more pages than murders if you add them all together." Delmas's counsel, a man who smelled faintly of soap and delay, arrived late and took the temperature of the room with a hand as if checking a radiator. "We will be reasonable," he said to the magistrate, to the weather, to anyone. The magistrate did not disagree. Bail was set in a tone that suggested one could almost believe in fairness if one didn't look directly at it. When they came out into the corridor, the day had decided not to be dramatic. Lucas went to arrange the transfer. Janvier vanished to shoe a clerk who liked to sit on statements so they would feel warmer. Michel stood in the corner where pipes make building noises and spoke to the air like a man practicing the sound of his own name in a foreign city. "I will go to Rue Saint-Gilles," he said, and the air seemed to accept the plan as decent. "I will say the word footing only if asked." "Say it if it asks you to," Maigret advised. "Words can sulk if ignored." They walked out together. In the yard, the light made wet cobbles look like scales. The boy, René, waited by the gate with a bicycle bell held in his hand, as if to show that serious notes can be portable. "They said I may ring once," he confided gravely, "for the right moment." "This isn't it," Lucas told him, and René nodded, pleased to have been asked to wait. Waiting has its own pride. They stopped on Rue Saint-Maur because memory prefers to be fed where it first ate. The cleaner's girl had a navy ribbon in her hair that had absorbed steam and looked slightly wilted. "Wax," she reminded them, not because they had forgotten, but because reminding provides a pocket-sized satisfaction. It was on the lapel, and I pressed too near it once, and it made a ghost on the cloth. "I won't forget." "You'll forget better things," Maigret said, which made her smile in a way that suggested she already had. He left his card on the counter without explaining why. "Some things are for later." At Jourdain's, René's belle had brothers. They made a little choir on the counter. Jourdain himself nodded like a hinge that had been oiled reluctantly. "The boy is useful," he said. "He takes messages to men who cannot bear to be surprised by words." He glanced at René, who looked solemn enough to be trusted to carry stones. "Use him," Maigret said. "Pay him what he thinks is too much. It will teach him not to refuse important work later." They turned toward the post on Rue Saint-Gilles. Michel slowed before the door as if doorways could revoke decisions. Inside, the clerk with the ivory face and the disappointment under it lifted his head and made room at the grill. "We have your place," he said. "We have misplaced men with less reason to come back." "I tied parcels too tight," Michel said, offering the worst thing first, as careful men do. "You will tie them correctly," the clerk said, "and you will apologize to no paper unless it bleeds." He slid a form across that seemed to sit straighter on the counter than other form. Maigret stood back, watching how a name sits when it finds its true desk. It isn't dramatic. The body simply agrees with itself. Michel wrote, slowly because slowness made ink behave, and did not shake. He did not look up at the bell. He did not need to. The sound lived in his hand now. By 11, the case had become a queue of smaller errands. Lucas fetched a receipt from the warehouse, so the foreman would have something to slap flat with his palm when auditors arrived next spring. Janvier walked the riverside where the sash had stuck, as if to confirm that paint has its own loyalties and always will. Lognon complained to a sandwich about the lack of theatre. Maigret allowed himself the café on the corner where the zinc remembers elbows and the bartender builds coffees so they look as if they've been waiting just for him. Fournier appeared at his shoulder as men appear who have decided a confession means they should be seen near decency. "I found a new tie," he announced, which was his way of saying he would try. "I will visit my supposed cousin in the Marais and admit he is not my cousin. It may save us both time." "Timetables are more accurate than cousins," Maigret said. "It's only fair." A man at the end of the counter turned the page of a newspaper with the careful contempt of those who expect the paper to be unworthy of the ink. There was no mention of Delmas. There would be a paragraph tomorrow, perhaps, in a court report that lined up small sins neatly, as if that were justice enough. In the afternoon, Maigret returned once more to the pension. He did not need to. The papers would walk themselves through the formalities now. But houses sometimes change their minds when no one is watching, and he liked to let them see that he hadn't either. Madame Vachon had beads the color of plums today. She had moved a plant nearer the window as if to show the house that it could have green thoughts as well as grey. "He sent a boy with a note," she said, meaning Delmas, meaning dignity. "It said his key is where it belongs." "Do we believe it?" Maigret asked. "We believe the string," she said, and showed it to him, removed now, replaced with a key that had a small honesty to its weight. Men return what they can, the rest goes to laundresses. Mademoiselle Bernard had a student who played scales so tentatively through the thin wall that one could hear the child sit up straighter at each mistake. The widow had found an old magazine and was pretending to be surprised by fashions she had seen before. Fournier, who had told the truth that morning and been allowed to keep his room, stood in the hall holding a needle cautiously, between finger and thumb, as if it were a small, potentially explosive insect. "For my shirt," he said defensively. "Madame Vachon says I'm allowed to learn one stitch." "Only one," she confirmed from the kitchen. "It is safer." On the landing, Maigret lifted the runner for the last time. The dust underneath had settled to its ordinary evenness. The crescent of disturbance had blunted at the edges the way a memory does when it discovers no one will shout at it again. He put the runner down and smoothed it as if it were a child's hair. In room 5, the chalk remained where it had been, a little square of authority without ambition. On the chair back, the jacket hung properly now, brushed and with its stitches picked out and done again more neatly by a hand that did not resent the work. He put his finger lightly on the lapel seam and felt the new thread, straight and indifferent to stories. A smell of soap had replaced petrol. The window stuck and opened and stuck again, as honest windows do. On his way out, he met Michel on the stairs. The man had a parcel under his arm, not from the post, but covered with brown paper in the same manner, as if his hands no longer knew another way to carry things. He stopped, awkward as ever, the body asking permission the tongue could not. "I am to return at 2, he said. "I walked by here because—" He looked at the wall, at the runner, at the idea of his own steps. "Because I can." "You can," Maigret said. He remembered Madame Maigret's remark, and, before he could decide whether this was sentimental, he reached into the paper bag he had been pretending not to be carrying. He had bought it at the umbrella shop with the gold letters that never kept anyone dry, a simple belt, dark and serviceable. He did not make a speech. "If the suit insists upon being itself," he said, offering it the way one offers string to a parcel, "tie yourself to you." Michel took it with an expression men wear when they discover someone has paid attention to their exact size. "It will be honest," he said, and then, embarrassed by what he had made the belt mean, he smiled like a child allowed to be a man without being asked to prove it. He went down, one careful step after another, the sort of walking that invites floors to be kind. On the street, the boy René, having been told his moment had arrived, rang the low bell once. It made its serious sound and then stopped, the way proper things do when they have been acknowledged. The air had that pale taste after rain that makes the city seem as if it has brushed its teeth. At the quay, Maigret hung his hat on its peg, felt the old pipe in his pocket, and decided not to light it yet. He sat a moment and let the room settle, the way he always did after cases that refused to dress themselves in drama. Lognon passed with a file and managed to look injured by the normalcy. Lucas whistled under his breath until a clerk told him gently not to, and then did it softer, which was gentlemanly. The telephone rang once and was for someone else. The stove ticked, because that is what stoves do when a day thinks about being evening. Maigret took out his pipe at last and filled it, tamping with the care a man gives to small things that have earned his respect. He thought of the suit that had tried to be two men and had ended as a lesson in being one. He thought of shoes that had confessed without meaning to, of wax rubbed from red to brown because someone wanted to tidy the world before looking at it, of a loop of string set straight by a hand that believed straightness and goodness were synonyms. He thought, briefly, of the thin morning rain in the kitchen window and Madame Maigret's quiet questions that always put his day where it belonged. He lit the pipe. The tobacco took the flame with that little consenting sound that meant it would behave, and the first draw tasted of nothing grand. It tasted of coffee cups and runners smoothed, and bells rung once at the corner, and men who will forget, then remember, then forget again that being useful is not a crime if one chooses to whom. He exhaled, slow, and let the smoke write a sentence on the air that did not need to be read by anyone to be true. The case ended the way small rivers end, by finding a wider water and joining it without fuss. There were signatures to gather, receipts to staple, a clerk to be reminded that stamps sit straight when hands aren't shaking. The foreman at the warehouse shook Maigret's hand with the honest gratitude of a man whose ledgers would not be questioned next spring by someone younger with a sharper pencil. At Rue Saint-Gilles, Michel learned the sound a pen makes when it agrees with the line beneath it. He did not apologize to the paper once. Delmas, for his part, submitted to procedure like a man who has always found comfort in rules when they are written in the right hand. He did not protest the charges. Fraudulent adjustment, misuse of documents, the tiresome phrase, intent to conceal, because they were words he understood. What he did not admit, he did not deny. He let silence do what it always had for him. His counsel arranged for bail, and he went home to a flat that had not moved a chair since morning. He would stand before a court within the month. His moustache would be neat on the day. He would be dignified in defeat because dignity is a habit one can maintain even when clothes no longer fit. 2 days later, rain remembered how to be sunlight, and the city looked as if someone had wiped its face with a careful hand. Maigret walked without urgency along the Boulevard du Temple, his hat on his head more from custom than from need. He passed the umbrella shop where nothing was ever really kept dry. The gold letters in the window reflected traffic like a procession. In the cleaners, the girl with the red nails had switched to a ribbon that resembled the sky on polite days. She saw him and lifted an iron off its heel as one salutes with an implement of one's trade. "The wax," she said, not to remind him, but because saying a thing that had mattered felt like continuing to be useful. "You were the first to call it by its name," he said. The praise was small and exact. It brightened her the way steam brightens a mirror before it fades. At Jourdain's, the boy René was arguing gently with a bell that wanted to ring too readily. He wanted seriousness, not chatter. He showed Maigret a new coin as if it had been minted to recognize him personally. "For not ringing," he said solemnly. "It was hard." "Most things worth paying for are," Maigret said, and left him to his choir of metal voices. The pension smelled of coffee and furniture that had been moved back to where it belonged. Madame Vachon's beads were a shade that made men behave. She wore them for the house's sake. Fournier had a needle between finger and thumb and a shirt laid flat on the table like a patient. The tongue between his teeth suggested virtue did not come naturally to him, but that he would practice until it did. The widow's spoon lay quiet in its saucer. She pretended not to have been present for any of it. Mademoiselle Bernard counted her change with the same concentration she gave to scales. Numbers are only notes that have decided to stand still. Room 5 was occupied again by its original tenant. The bed had been made in that particular way men use when they want to be thanked for neatness. On the chair back hung a different jacket, similar in pattern, better in character. The quick blue stitches had been picked out. In their place, patient thread lay with the indifference of work well done. On the keyboard, there was a key where a string had been. No one remarked on it. Houses prefer you to notice without announcing that you have. Michel arrived as Maigret was leaving, carrying under his arm a parcel that wasn't from the post, but had learned its manners there. He wore the belt now, dark, serviceable, the sort of thing that does its job without competing with a man. The suit still suggested a cousin's generosity, but the belt made the difference between borrowing and being swallowed. He stopped not to be inspected, but because the body asks permission of a habit it has just acquired. They gave me a counter to mind at midday, he said. Only for an hour, to see if I can keep a line from turning into a knot. The clerk says it is better to tie well than quickly. He is a philosopher, Maigret said. The city is full of them if one listens. Michel turned the parcel in his hands. I thought about something, he said, with the seriousness of a man afraid to be foolish. He did not want the numbers to squeak because he thought someone would hear and come. But squeaks bring oil. If he had let them, someone would have brought him a little can. He looked worried, as if this amounted to being unkind to the wrong man. Perhaps, Maigret said, or perhaps he liked applying oil himself and resented any hand near the hinge that was not his. There are tidy men who cannot bear to be helped. Michel nodded, the gesture of one who accepts that the world is not a single lesson. He went past, with the small care he gave to stair treads, and the runner took his steps as if it had expected them. At the quay, the examining magistrate sent a note written with the pointed hand of people who suspect their pens of sarcasm. The matter would proceed without drama. The court did not intend to show an example, merely to sustain a standard. A fine seemed likely, perhaps a suspended term. In the warehouse, the foreman had instituted a new ritual. The sash was to be lifted and closed in front of a second man, who would cough once for the record. The watchman found this pleasingly theatrical and coughed with professional pride. A thin line of chalk had been drawn on the office wall at heel height. On wet days it recorded the daily confessions of shoes and absolved them without comment. In the evening, Maigret went home, the way men go home, when their day has been full of small things that ask to be placed in their right compartments. The kitchen was warm in the way rooms are when someone has been in them long enough to persuade the air to be friendly. Madame Maigret had a pot that asked to be stirred and a chair that asked to be sat in. He obliged both. She pointed to his sleeve and found no wax. He felt disproportionately satisfied. You look as if the city had apologized for something, she said, passing a plate. It has returned a key, he said, and there is a belt where thread was. That is apology enough. They ate, and the conversation was the sort that sits down quietly and is pleased to be where it is. Afterward he washed his hands and stood at the narrow window. The street wasn't quite dry. Pavements have their own reluctances. Across the way a woman shook crumbs from a cloth with the gravity of a priest distributing blessings. A tram sounded like a thought, carried a little too far and then corrected. Somewhere a bell, low, serious, pronounced itself and then retired. He felt, as he often did at that hour, that Paris was a house he knew how to move through without bumping the furniture. On the table lay a newspaper. There was a small square in the law reports that would have been invisible if one had not been hunting for it. It spoke of a commercial irregularity, of corrective documentation, of an employee temporarily inconvenienced. It did not say, man in a suit that did not fit. It did not say, numbers mustn't squeak. It did not say, thread the color of shadows. Newspapers rarely do. The little square, in its neatness, had something of Delmas about it, tidy to the point of self-erasure. He folded the paper in quarters and then again, a habit from years of trains and coat pockets, and set it aside. He tamped his pipe and lit it and felt the tobacco, accept the flame with the same consenting sound it had yesterday, which is one of the comforts of certain vices. He thought of the case, tracing it not as a policeman would draw a diagram, but as a man remembers a walk, turns, small landmarks, a doorway where one hesitated because there was music, the smell of glue in a place no one ever mentions in guidebooks. He thought of shoes that confessed and a window that resisted, of a jacket that tried to be kind and succeeded only in disguising a moment, of a boy who rang once at the right time and then had the good sense to stop, of a concierge who knew how a house disapproves. He thought of Michel, hands at his sides, apologizing to nothing, of Fournier, who would be very proud of a single, passable stitch, of a foreman whose dignity came from knowing when to say the word grease without euphemism. In a week, perhaps 2, another case would begin, something that smelled of onions and cologne, or of chalk and impatience. He would go somewhere in the rain and put his hand to wood and feel the resistance of paint where other men had forced it. He would wait, because waiting in the right place is half of understanding. People would bring him their sentences, some of which would be true in ways that had nothing to do with facts. He would be quiet enough for the city to speak to itself in his presence. He turned from the window because he did not want to miss the small satisfaction of watching Madame Maigret put away the plates in the order she always did. Sometimes it is necessary to see a ritual to remember why rules have sense before they have power. He drew on the pipe and tasted the day reducing itself to what would endure of it. A loop of string, a low bell, a stitch that held, the dignity of a man being measured in his own cloth at last. When the telephone rang, it was only Lucas with the contented tone of the young after rain. "Michel put the belt on the outside," he said, amused. "Over the coat, like a uniform." "Let him," Maigret said. "He's learning where he ends." "And Delmas?" "He will learn too," Maigret said. "That order without kindness is only vanity with good manners." He hung up. The room held its silence the way good rooms do, not jealously, but with generosity. Outside, a late walker's shoes made a small squeak on the corner, and no one hurried to stop them. He stood a moment longer at the window, then turned down the lamp with his wide, careful fingers, and let the city return to its own breathing. Numbers and names, bells and runners, suits and bodies, each fitted for tonight at least, to the shape that suited it, 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 that suited